Story 1. The Lawnmower Theft. A guy from a lawn care service stole my lawnmower and disappeared. I occasionally hire local workers through a third-party app to mow my lawn. I've never had any issues, until recently, when I decided to mow it myself and realized the mower was gone. I usually keep it on the back porch. After checking my security footage, I was shocked to see the last guy I'd hired stealing my brand new mower, the one I'd only used twice, and trying to sneak it out through my neighbor's yard. The idiot must have thought my camera had a narrow angle. I reported it to the service, and they confirmed it was theft. They told me I needed to file a police report so they could help track the guy down and recover the mower. Update 1. The company gave me the thief's direct contact. His excuse? He claimed he thought the mower was broken and decided to help me out by removing it as junk, assuming that's why I hired them. Now he says someone stole his trailer with my mower inside it. I'm currently on the phone with the sheriff, filing a report. The sheriff said the amount qualifies as grand theft since it's over $500. He contacted the guy and gave him 24 hours to either return the mower or pay the full cost. Otherwise, it becomes a criminal case and a warrant will be issued for his arrest. Small-town sheriffs don't mess around. I also posted the theft video on the neighborhood app next door. Someone messaged me saying they knew his mom and sister and would reach out to them. A few others even found his Instagram. Update 2. Things are getting wild. Someone shared the next door video on Facebook, and now people who know the guy personally are clowning on him. Apparently, he'd been pretending online to be a successful entrepreneur and self-made influencer, and now everyone's tagging him under the stolen mower post. I honestly didn't want to ruin his life. I just wanted my mower back. But then his mother contacted me, begging me to remove the video because it was hurting his business and reputation. I couldn't help but laugh. I told her exactly what my next steps were and explained that fixing her son's mess wasn't her responsibility. I sent her the invoice so she could forward it to him. He still had 23 hours left. After that, arrest warrant. Then he deleted all his social media accounts. Every tag turned gray. It's 9:47 p.m. now. I'll call him at 7 a.m. to see what he plans to do. Honestly, I doubt this ends well. Update 3. Woke up to 36 missed calls between 1 and 4 a.m. Thank God for Do Not Disturb mode and spam blocking. When I tried calling back, the call went straight to voicemail. Then I tried from my Google Voice number and it went through. So yeah, he blocked my main number. I also spoke to his mom again. She's changed her tune now. Said she's tried reaching him too, but he's ignoring her calls. She finally told me, do what you have to do. He's really about to run from the law over a damned lawnmower. Update 4. Finally reached him through his sister. He said he doesn't have the $579 to replace the mower and asked if I could convince the sheriff to give him 2 weeks to get the money together, which is, by the way, an admission of guilt. I told him to borrow from someone or ask his family because I wasn't dropping the charges. He's got 9 hours left. Tick-tock. Update 5. The sheriff sent a deputy over to inspect the property, take my statement, and collect documents from the app that hired him. Guess what? The deputy ran a background check, and it turns out the guy already has a criminal record in another county for theft. They're done waiting. The warrant's being issued. I don't feel bad for him at all. He dug his own hole, now he can sit in it. Then out of nowhere, I get a message from him using a new number. I took screenshots and forwarded them to the sheriff. Here's what he wrote. Hey man, it's Dushan. You posted that video of me taking your mower. I didn't mean any harm. I thought it didn't work and tried to help myself. Lots of my clients asked me to take old gear off their hands. Yours didn't even start when I tried it. I'm not paying for something you just left in your yard. This is your fault, not mine. And about that sheriff thing, I've got a great lawyer. God's on my side. You act like it's the end of the world, but I'll rise again. Good luck, bro. Yeah, the dude has completely lost it.
I stopped responding altogether and forwarded the messages to his mother and sister. He seriously needs help. Then he sent another text. You think this is a joke, man? I don't care about you or the cops. It's all a game to me. People like you always try to bring down guys like me when we're rising up. You'll never understand my hustle. I live this every day. I could buy 10 lawnmowers if I wanted. Yours was trash anyway. Can't even afford a John Deere like a real man. You're a clown. Always will be. That's probably the last update, unless the sheriff tells me he's been arrested. If that happens, I'll post his mugshot. For now, I just bought a new mower, an electric one I can keep inside the house this time. Thanks to everyone for the support, jokes, and laughs. You honestly helped me stay sane through this mess. Final update. The sheriff called. The arrest warrant is active. If his plates get scanned or he's pulled over, he's done. Police don't have his current address, only his mom's. But I gotta say, the sheriff's office handled this incredibly fast. Not sure if I should tell his mother. Oh, and I treated myself today. Bought a new electric mower with a leaf blower, trimmer, and quick charger. It's quiet, clean, and stays in my garage. A corporate lawyer friend read the service's terms and told me I have a solid case. He's taking it pro bono. He even thinks the company will settle out of court to avoid bad publicity. And get this, someone said the thief is in Texas now. Looks like the guy really ran off over a lawnmower.
Almost 7 years ago, my family cut me off completely and threw me out of the house. At the time, I was only 22, still working my first job, not financially stable enough to rent on my own. It all happened so suddenly that I had no time to prepare, emotionally or financially. And the reason for all of it was my sister, Hannah. Hannah and I were never especially close. She was quite a bit older than me. By the time she was 27, she married her boyfriend, Pete. They stayed married for about 3 years before she filed for divorce, claiming Pete had been cheating on her with one of my friends. Back then, I was still living with my parents after college, saving money before moving out. Everything at home was fine until Hannah came back one night in tears, declaring she'd discovered Pete's betrayal. According to her, he had been having an affair for 6 months, and somehow it was my fault. The reason? I had introduced Pete to my friend Emily. She had been struggling to gain weight, and since Pete was a certified nutritionist, he offered to help her out. That was it. Hannah twisted that into a story that Emily was the woman Pete cheated with. I was stunned. Emily and I weren't super close, but I knew her well enough to believe she would never get involved with a married man. And Pete, if anything, he always seemed hopelessly devoted to Hannah. He talked about her constantly, and not once in those 3 years did I see anything suspicious. But none of my doubts mattered. My parents instantly sided with Hannah. They didn't ask for evidence, didn't question anything. They just took her word for it. I can't blame them for choosing their daughter over their son-in-law, but what broke me was how quickly they turned on me. Hannah stormed into the house one day, hysterical, and convinced them that I was to blame for ruining her marriage, simply because I had introduced Pete to Emily. Within minutes, they told me to pack my things and leave. When I begged them to listen, they said if I didn't go on my own, they'd throw me out. And just like that, I lost my home and my family in the same day. I still remember sitting on the curb outside with my bags, crying for an hour before finally calling a friend to let me crash at his place. I tried reaching out to my parents in the days that followed. Calls, texts, visits, nothing worked. They blocked my number. The one time I went to the house, my mom threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. That's when it hit me. They truly believed I was responsible. Looking back, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. Hannah was always the favorite. I was the unexpected second child, the one who got leftovers while she got the spotlight. As kids, it didn't matter much to me, but I never thought that favoritism would destroy my place in the family entirely. Pete blocked me too. No explanation, no chance to defend myself. And Hannah moved back in with my parents, making it impossible for me to even try talking things out. The only person left who might know the truth
was Emily. We weren't close, but I reached out anyway, and when I explained what Hannah had accused me of, she was horrified. She swore nothing ever happened between her and Pete, that their interactions had been strictly professional. To prove it, she even told me about her long-term boyfriend. They were already talking about marriage. She showed me photos of the two of them together. Her explanation made infinitely more sense than anything Hannah had said. Deep down, I already knew Hannah had lied, probably to cover the real reason for the divorce. But without any proof, I was powerless. My family had made up their minds, and I was left alone. Back then, all I wanted was to reconnect with my family. Despite everything they had done to me, I still missed them terribly. But as time passed, I had no choice but to adapt. I found an apartment, poured myself into work, and tried to build a life. Bills had to be paid, and keeping myself busy was the only way I knew how to cope. It wasn't easy. The pain was overwhelming. But slowly, I taught myself to move forward, with or without their support. Years went by, and life began to change for the better. I moved out of that tiny apartment into something much nicer, built a stable career, and just last week, I proposed to the woman I've been dating for 2 years. She said yes. But the real turning point came shortly after my engagement. A few days after my fiancée, Lisa, posted our engagement photos on Instagram and cross-shared them to Facebook, I got an email. Not just any email, but the email that finally explained everything that had happened years ago, complete with proof. It turned out that Lisa, who works as a doctor, had once met Pete, my former brother-in-law, at a medical seminar. They had stayed loosely connected on Facebook. That's how he stumbled across our engagement post. For the first time in years, I was glad the world was so small. Instead of messaging me directly, Pete chose to send an anonymous email. Later, he explained it was because he didn't want to seem awkward. After all, years had passed since the divorce, and he had no desire to look like someone still clinging to the past. He also admitted that since he'd blocked me back then, it felt strange to just pop back up in my life. But what mattered was the content. The email laid out the full truth behind the divorce, and it completely shattered the story Hannah had built. It was Hannah who had been unfaithful, not Pete. And worse, she had cheated with my friend Frank. At the time, Frank worked as a cashier at the local grocery store. Never in a million years would I have suspected anything between them. They'd been so careful to hide it. But Pete eventually found out. When confronted, Hannah tried to twist the situation, telling Pete that it was my fault. She claimed I had introduced her to Frank, even encouraging their connection by mentioning his interest in music since she was a decent singer herself. From there, she said, things just happened. To cover her tracks, she even insisted I had helped them hide the affair all along, which was, of course, a blatant lie. Pete admitted he was furious when he found out. Instead of thinking clearly, he blocked everyone in my family, including me. Looking back, he knows it was the wrong move, but at the time, anger clouded everything.
The email itself included screenshots of conversations between Hannah and Frank. Messages where they openly confessed their love, joked about how easy it was to fool Pete, and arrange secret meetups. Hannah had even signed off using her rarely mentioned middle name, something only a few people knew. There was no denying it. Reading those messages was surreal. For the first time in years, I had undeniable proof. Hannah had lied about everything. I eventually confronted Pete in person after realizing he was in Lisa's Facebook friends list. He admitted that Emily, my friend who had originally been accused, had told him her side years ago. He just never told me because he didn't want to stir things up again. He regretted it now, because if he had spoken up earlier, I could have cleared my name long ago. Still, he was willing to help me now. Pete and I agreed that Hannah's lies had destroyed enough lives, and neither of us wanted her manipulations to stand unchallenged any longer. The truth was clear. Hannah had weaponized her family's trust to protect herself, even if it meant sacrificing me. She dragged my name through the mud, convinced my parents to disown me, all to keep her own reputation intact while she pursued her affair. And for the first time in years, I had the evidence to finally set the record straight. I'm certain my sister never once tried to tell our parents the truth. Instead, she kept feeding them lies during the divorce, and they swallowed every word without hesitation. She knew that if our parents ever discovered she was the one who cheated, she'd be in serious trouble, and she just couldn't allow that. Well, now the truth is finally out, and I'm going to use it to destroy her life the same way she destroyed mine all those years ago. I wasn't sure if my parents were still living in the same house, since I hadn't seen them in 7 years, but an old neighbor confirmed they never moved. Even better, Hannah still lived there. That didn't surprise me at all. She was always lazy and hated responsibility. Living off aging parents while they did everything for her was exactly her style. 2 days ago, Pete and I showed up unannounced. My mom opened the door, and we pushed our way inside before she could react. My dad and Hannah were sitting in the living room, the happy family reunited, but only for a moment. Their faces twisted as soon as they saw us. My dad immediately started shouting, threatening to call the police if we didn't leave. I told him he could do whatever he wanted, but only after reading the documents we brought. My parents looked confused, while Hannah turned pale and bolted to her room. I figured she was trying to avoid the inevitable, but there was no escaping it. Pete pulled out the divorce papers and screenshots of Hannah's messages with Frank, while I explained the real story. Pete also revealed how Hannah had been forced to give up our grandmother's diamond heirloom ring to settle the divorce, since her teacher salary couldn't cover the payout. My parents were stunned. We sat there watching as the drama unfolded. My dad demanded answers from Hannah, but when she tried lying yet again, even with the evidence right in front of her, he'd had enough. He packed her belongings, shoved them into a bag, and kicked her out of the house on the spot. I didn't need to be told twice. Pete and I walked out together, leaving Hannah begging our parents to let her back in, exactly the way I had once begged them years ago. It was the sweetest revenge. I felt nothing but satisfaction. A couple days later, Hannah showed up at my place, demanding I fix things with our parents. I don't even know how she found my address, but I told her point blank that I owed her nothing. She ruined my life, and I simply returned the favor. We were even now. Apparently, she has no pride left, because the moment I said that, she broke down sobbing, calling me a monster. I honestly didn't care. I put on my headphones, turned up the music, and let Lisa keep working peacefully in her office. Eventually, she left, but not before scrawling a message on my door with a marker reminding me that I'm a vengeful monster. To be honest, I don't feel bad about what I did. I don't think I'm the villain here. I didn't lie or scheme like she did. I just exposed the truth. So, am I really the bad guy for ruining my sister's life and getting her kicked out of our parents' home 7 years after she blamed me for her divorce? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Update 1. Hannah didn't stop bothering me. Even after a week, she kept calling non-stop, 14 times in a day. I finally threatened to involve the police, and that made her back off, at least for now. I have no idea how she keeps getting my number after I block her, but apparently she has her friends add me into group calls from different numbers. She's tried guilt-tripping me, saying her teacher salary isn't enough to live on. But I know that's not the real issue. What she really hates is finally having to pay rent, utilities, and groceries herself. And honestly, that's not my problem. As for my parents, they're not much better. They found me on Facebook after seeing Lisa's engagement post. Now they're suddenly interested in being part of my life again. They even hinted that they expect to be invited to my wedding. They still haven't apologized, but somehow think they deserve to show up on one of the most important days of my life. Lisa and I laughed reading their messages because they were so delusional it almost seemed like a bad joke. But in truth, the whole thing is more sad than funny.
Update 2. Hannah showed up at my house again, even after I threatened to report her for harassment yesterday. I was getting ready to leave for work, but she stopped me by flopping onto the hood of my car, refusing to move until I spoke with her. It was incredibly annoying, and this time I actually called the police. They took her away while she screamed and cried, trying to paint me as the bad guy. Unfortunately for her, nobody bought it. It took some time to file the official report against her, but as soon as I did, I rushed to work so this incident wouldn't ruin my day. I figured my parents would bail her out since she's their favorite, and I was right. They sent her home and then followed up with a long message telling me I had been too harsh and unfair to them over a mistake they supposedly made almost 10 years ago. It was laughable. Nothing my sister and parents did to me back then could ever be called merciful or fair. No mercy stopped them from literally throwing me out of the house with nowhere to go. So now, I see no reason to offer forgiveness or kindness. I messaged my parents saying that after all these years, they had lost any right to tell me what I can or cannot do, and that they should stop deluding themselves. I haven't blocked them yet, had to check the message first, but I will soon. Hopefully then, I can finally cut that whole family out of my life for good. Update 3. I just got home from work, checked my socials, and saw that my parents sent me another long message. Lisa and I read it together, and I swear it was the funniest thing I've ever seen. These poor people don't realize that nothing they say or do now can hurt me. I just laughed at how pathetic they are. They still think we're a family and announced they'd taken Hannah back, claiming both of their children deserve a second chance, as if I was ever in the wrong. They expected Lisa and me to visit them for dinner before my wedding to civilly resolve our differences. Too bold of them to assume I'd ever want them anywhere near my wedding. We laughed at their absurd message, and I responded that I had zero interest in any invitations from them. I'm perfectly happy living my life without them, just like I have for the last 7 years. They made it clear long ago that I'm better off without them. I'm grateful it took me so long to realize that. I no longer need them or their so-called forgiveness. They can continue playing happy family with Hannah all they want. I don't care. After sending that last message, I blocked them permanently. That's it. I'm done. I'm sure they'll try to contact me again somehow, but it doesn't matter. Lisa is the only family I need, and I'm happier than I've ever been with just her. My parents and sister never could see past their own noses, and I doubt they ever will. Next time they try to reach out, they'll be talking to my lawyer. My ex-wife is trying to win me back by using our daughters. Doesn't sound too serious at first, right? Yeah, it's what I thought too. But as much as I'd love to tell my ex to go to hell and never see her again, we share 2 daughters and joint custody. So completely cutting her out of my life just isn't possible, not unless I walk away from my kids too, which I'd never do. We got married young, 20 years old, dating for 3 years before that. Our daughters were born during the first year of marriage. After the second birth, my ex had complications that made it difficult for her to get pregnant again. I didn't care. I was just grateful she made it through safely, and that we already had 2 beautiful little girls to love. The marriage lasted 9 years. It ended when I filed for divorce after discovering she cheated. I have 0 tolerance for betrayal. I refuse to make myself miserable for something I didn't cause. Maybe it sounds strange, but my love for her died the exact moment I learned about her affair in detail. So no, this isn't some story about a man who can't let go. I moved on 7 years ago. Hell, I don't even hate her. I just don't care. Whatever happens in her life means nothing to me, unless it directly affects our kids. The problem is, I seem to be the only one who's actually moved on. My ex, her family, and even our daughters keep trying to push us back together, even though I've made it crystal clear that I have absolutely no desire to ever be with her again. Maybe the fact that I stayed single for years after the divorce gave them false hope. But honestly, I just wasn't ready to jump into anything new. My daughters were my top priority. Plus, I had my own emotional mess to sort through after her betrayal, which, thankfully, I managed with help from friends, family, and therapy. My relationship with my daughters is great. We don't fight, we don't yell, and they're not rebellious or dramatic. Everything's been peaceful, except for one issue. They know their mother cheated. She told them herself about 3 years ago. Since then, I think she's been feeding them her version of events. I've asked her countless times to stop. It doesn't help anyone, least of all the girls. But instead of stopping, she just got sneakier about it. Since the divorce, she hasn't dated anyone, or even tried. I guess she thinks that makes her look noble. But honestly, I find it insulting. She could cheat on me while we were married, but now she's suddenly living like a saint? Whatever. That's her problem, not mine. For years, I could ignore the little comments my daughters made about their mom. How good she looks now, how happy she seems, the photos she just happened to show them where she's clearly dressed up to impress. But lately, things have gotten worse. Why? Because I started seeing someone. Clemence isn't the first woman I've dated since the divorce, but this is by far the most serious relationship I've had since it ended. She's 8 years older than me. We actually knew each other for about 4 years before anything romantic happened. We shared a hobby, became close friends, and eventually realized there was more between us. And yes, I genuinely love her. It even surprised me when I realized it. I honestly thought my ex's betrayal had broken something inside me, that I'd never be able to love again the way I once did. At first, my daughters didn't know much about Clemence. Just like my previous relationships, I kept things private. But eventually, they started coming home earlier than expected and began seeing her around. Nothing inappropriate ever happened, but soon came the sighs, the cold looks, and the questions. What is she doing here? Don't you think it's unfair to Mom? It was like they thought I was dating just to spite their mother. I sat them down for a serious talk, explained everything over and over, but it just didn't sink in. They're still clinging to some childish fantasy where their parents get back together. Clemence, thankfully, is incredibly understanding. She doesn't take it personally and keeps saying, give them time. But honestly, I'm not convinced time will fix this. It hasn't yet, so why would it now? I've run out of ideas. That's why I'm asking for advice. Is there any way, any possible approach to help my daughters finally understand that I will never get back with their mother?
Sounds harmless enough, right? Well, not really. As much as I'd love to tell my ex to get lost and never see her again, we share 2 daughters and have joint custody. So, cutting her out of my life completely isn't an option. Unless I'm willing to lose my kids too. We got married young, both 20, after dating for 3 years. Our twin girls were born during the first year of marriage. My ex had some complications after that, which made future pregnancies difficult. At the time, I didn't care about that at all. I was just grateful she survived everything safely, and that we already had 2 beautiful little girls we adored. Our marriage lasted 9 years. It ended when I filed for divorce after discovering she had cheated. I have zero tolerance for that kind of betrayal, and saw no reason to keep suffering for something that wasn't my fault. Some might find it strange, but every ounce of love I had for her died the moment I learned the full story of her affair. So no, this isn't some sad tale about a man who can't move on. I did, 7 years ago. Hell, I don't even hate her anymore. I just couldn't care less what happens in her life as long as it doesn't affect our daughters. The real problem is that I'm the only one who truly moved on. My ex, her family, and even our daughters keep trying to reunite us, despite me being very clear that I have zero interest in ever being with her again. Maybe the fact that I didn't date anyone for years after the divorce gave them false hope. But honestly, I wasn't about to jump into another relationship that fast, especially when I had 2 girls to raise. They were my priority. Eventually, with the help of friends, family, and therapy, I got my mental health back on track. My relationship with my daughters has always been great. No fights, no yelling, no teenage rebellion, yet they're smart, kind, and we've always been close. But there's one big problem. They know their mother cheated on me because she told them about 3 years ago. Since then, I'm pretty sure she's been feeding them a twisted version of events. I've asked her countless times to stop dragging them into our adult mess, but she doesn't listen. She hasn't dated anyone since the divorce. Hasn't even slept with anyone, apparently. She thinks that makes her look noble. Personally, I find it insulting. When we were married, she was sleeping with someone else, and now she suddenly can live without intimacy for 7 years? Whatever, that's her problem. For years, I brushed off the occasional mentions of her looks or the photos my daughter showed me where she clearly dressed up just to make an impression. But things changed after I started dating again. My girlfriend Clemens isn't my first relationship since the divorce, but she's definitely the most serious one. She's 8 years younger than me, and we'd known each other for 4 years before we started dating. It grew naturally, from friendship into something deeper. And honestly, I love her. I didn't expect that. I thought my ex's betrayal had broken something inside me, that I'd never be able to love again. Turns out I was wrong. At first, my daughters didn't know much about my relationship with Clemens. Then they started showing up at my house earlier than scheduled, sometimes finding her there. We were never inappropriate, just living our normal lives. But soon came the questions, what is she doing here? Or, that's not fair to Mom. It's like they genuinely believe I'm seeing someone just to hurt their mother. I've had long, honest talks with them, but they just don't seem to get it. They can't let go of the fantasy that their parents might reunite someday. Thankfully, Clemens is understanding. She says the girls just need time. Oh, I'm not sure that will help. It hasn't so far. So yeah, I came online looking for advice. Maybe someone out there knows how to help my daughters finally understand that no matter what happens, I'm never going back to their mother. When I try explaining that you can't be faithful to someone you're no longer with, they just ignore it. I've begged my ex countless times to stop manipulating the girls and keep them out of our adult issues, but she doesn't care. At one point, I even considered going to court to get full custody, but was advised it probably backfired. The truth is, my daughters know why we divorced. They know their mother cheated. I usually don't recommend telling kids something like that, but mine are old enough now. The problem is that their understanding of the story is based entirely on her version, filled with excuses and self-pity. A year ago, I finally tried explaining my side, only to find out she had already told them years before, when they were around 13. They know what she did, but they can't comprehend it emotionally. To them, their mother has always been loving and caring. They can't imagine her cold and distant like she was during the affair. Back then, she completely shut me out.
Not just physically, but emotionally. She stopped doing little things. Morning kisses before work, random hugs, shared jokes, all gone. I realized something was off and eventually, with a close friend's help, uncovered the truth. She had been giving all that affection to someone else. I'll never forgive that. My daughters don't understand why, and honestly, I don't want them to. No child should ever have to carry that kind of pain. So when they talk about regret, forgiveness, or getting back together, I just can't relate. Where was all that love when it mattered? Update. It's been a while since my original post. A lot has changed. My daughters actually found that post by accident. I had no idea they were even on that site. One day, I came home from work and found them both in tears. They ran to me, hugged me, and begged me to forgive them. Apparently, they'd read one of my comments and learned the full extent of their mother's affair and how deeply it hurt me back then. We went through a lot of therapy together. Honestly, I never blamed them. They were just kids, manipulated by their mother, who used their love as a weapon. After a few months of family therapy, the psychologist told us we no longer needed weekly sessions, just occasional check-ins. My daughters and I became closer than ever. Their relationship with their mom, though, took a hit, understandably. I told them not to dwell on her mistakes. I've long since made peace with what she did. That's also something we worked through in therapy. I eventually had a serious talk with my ex, made it absolutely clear that the getting back together nonsense needed to stop. Whether she listened or not, I don't know, but at least she stopped bothering the girls with it. Or maybe they've learned to tune her out. Either way, as long as my daughters are okay, I don't care what she's doing. As things settled, Clements and my daughter started bonding, really bonding. They started talking to her more, even asking her for advice on girl stuff. The first time I saw that, I nearly cried. Not long after, Clements and the girls surprised me. They organized a private dinner, just the three of us. Then Clements proposed to me. Yeah, she beat me to it. I was stunned, but happier than I had been in years. Not just because of her proposal, but because my daughters helped her plan it. We had a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family, and now we're expecting a baby. My daughters can't wait to become big sisters, and I honestly can't wait to watch them spoil their new sibling rotten.
My ex-wife is trying to win me back by using our daughters. Doesn't sound too serious at first, right? Yeah, it's what I thought too. But as much as I'd love to tell my ex to go to hell and never see her again, we share 2 daughters and joint custody. So completely cutting her out of my life just isn't possible, not unless I walk away from my kids too, which I'd never do. We got married young, 20 years old, dating for 3 years before that. Our daughters were born during the first year of marriage. After the second birth, my ex had complications that made it difficult for her to get pregnant again. I didn't care. I was just grateful she made it through safely, and that we already had 2 beautiful little girls to love. The marriage lasted 9 years. It ended when I filed for divorce after discovering she cheated. I have 0 tolerance for betrayal. I refuse to make myself miserable for something I didn't cause. Maybe it sounds strange, but my love for her died the exact moment I learned about her affair in detail. So no, this isn't some story about a man who can't let go. I moved on 7 years ago. Hell, I don't even hate her. I just don't care. Whatever happens in her life means nothing to me, unless it directly affects our kids. The problem is, I seem to be the only one who's actually moved on. My ex, her family, and even our daughters keep trying to push us back together, even though I've made it crystal clear that I have absolutely no desire to ever be with her again. Maybe the fact that I stayed single for years after the divorce gave them false hope. But honestly, I just wasn't ready to jump into anything new. My daughters were my top priority. Plus, I had my own emotional mess to sort through after her betrayal, which, thankfully, I managed with help from friends, family, and therapy. My relationship with my daughters is great. We don't fight, we don't yell, and they're not rebellious or dramatic.
Everything's been peaceful, except for one issue. They know their mother cheated. She told them herself about 3 years ago. Since then, I think she's been feeding them her version of events. I've asked her countless times to stop. It doesn't help anyone, least of all the girls. But instead of stopping, she just got sneakier about it. Since the divorce, she hasn't dated anyone, or even tried. I guess she thinks that makes her look noble. But honestly, I find it insulting. She could cheat on me while we were married, but now she's suddenly living like a saint? Whatever. That's her problem, not mine. For years, I could ignore the little comments my daughters made about their mom. How good she looks now, how happy she seems, the photos she just happened to show them where she's clearly dressed up to impress. But lately, things have gotten worse. Why? Because I started seeing someone. Clemence isn't the first woman I've dated since the divorce, but this is by far the most serious relationship I've had since it ended. She's 8 years older than me. We actually knew each other for about 4 years before anything romantic happened. We shared a hobby, became close friends, and eventually realized there was more between us. And yes, I genuinely love her. It even surprised me when I realized it. I honestly thought my ex's betrayal had broken something inside me, that I'd never be able to love again the way I once did. At first, my daughters didn't know much about Clemence. Just like my previous relationships, I kept things private. But eventually, they started coming home earlier than expected and began seeing her around. Nothing inappropriate ever happened, but soon came the sighs, the cold looks, and the questions. What is she doing here? Don't you think it's unfair to Mom? It was like they thought I was dating just to spite their mother. I sat them down for a serious talk, explained everything over and over, but it just didn't sink in. They're still clinging to some childish fantasy where their parents get back together. Clemence, thankfully, is incredibly understanding. She doesn't take it personally and keeps saying, give them time. But honestly, I'm not convinced time will fix this. It hasn't yet, so why would it now? I've run out of ideas. That's why I'm asking for advice. Is there any way, any possible approach to help my daughters finally understand that I will never get back with their mother?
Sounds harmless enough, right? Well, not really. As much as I'd love to tell my ex to get lost and never see her again, we share 2 daughters and have joint custody. So, cutting her out of my life completely isn't an option, unless I'm willing to lose my kids too. We got married young, both 20, after dating for 3 years. Our twin girls were born during the first year of marriage. My ex had some complications after that, which made future pregnancies difficult. At the time, I didn't care about that at all. I was just grateful she survived everything safely, and that we already had 2 beautiful little girls we adored. Our marriage lasted 9 years. It ended when I filed for divorce after discovering she had cheated. I have zero tolerance for that kind of betrayal, and saw no reason to keep suffering for something that wasn't my fault. Some might find it strange, but every ounce of love I had for her died the moment I learned the full story of her affair. So no, this isn't some sad tale about a man who can't move on. I did, 7 years ago. Hell, I don't even hate her anymore. I just couldn't care less what happens in her life as long as it doesn't affect our daughters. The real problem is that I'm the only one who truly moved on. My ex, her family, and even our daughters keep trying to reunite us, despite me being very clear that I have zero interest in ever being with her again. Maybe the fact that I didn't date anyone for years after the divorce gave them false hope. But honestly, I wasn't about to jump into another relationship that fast, especially when I had 2 girls to raise. They were my priority. Eventually, with the help of friends, family, and therapy, I got my mental health back on track. My relationship with my daughters has always been great. No fights, no yelling, no teenage rebellion, yet they're smart, kind, and we've always been close. But there's one big problem. They know their mother cheated on me because she told them about 3 years ago. Since then, I'm pretty sure she's been feeding them a twisted version of events. I've asked her countless times to stop dragging them into our adult mess, but she doesn't listen. She hasn't dated anyone since the divorce,
hasn't even slept with anyone apparently. She thinks that makes her look noble. Personally, I find it insulting. When we were married, she was sleeping with someone else, and now she suddenly can live without intimacy for 7 years? Whatever, that's her problem. For years, I brushed off the occasional mentions of her looks or the photos my daughter showed me where she clearly dressed up just to make an impression. But things changed after I started dating again. My girlfriend Clemence isn't my first relationship since the divorce, but she's definitely the most serious one. She's 8 years younger than me, and we'd known each other for 4 years before we started dating. It grew naturally, from friendship into something deeper. And honestly, I love her. I didn't expect that. I thought my ex's betrayal had broken something inside me, that I'd never be able to love again. Turns out I was wrong. At first, my daughters didn't know much about my relationship with Clemence. Then they started showing up at my house earlier than scheduled, sometimes finding her there. We were never inappropriate, just living our normal lives. But soon came the questions, what is she doing here? Or, that's not fair to mom. It's like they genuinely believe I'm seeing someone just to hurt their mother. I've had long, honest talks with them, but they just don't seem to get it. They can't let go of the fantasy that their parents might reunite someday. Thankfully, Clemence is understanding. She says the girls just need time. Oh, I'm not sure that will help. It hasn't so far. So yeah, I came online looking for advice. Maybe someone out there knows how to help my daughters finally understand that no matter what happens, I'm never going back to their mother. When I try explaining that you can't be faithful to someone you're no longer with, they just ignore it. I've begged my ex countless times to stop manipulating the girls and keep them out of our adult issues, but she doesn't care. At one point, I even considered going to court to get full custody, but was advised it probably backfired. The truth is, my daughters know why we divorced. They know their mother cheated. I usually don't recommend telling kids something like that, but mine are old enough now. The problem is that their understanding of the story is based entirely on her version, filled with excuses and self-pity. A year ago, I finally tried explaining my side, only to find out she had already told them years before, when they were around 13. They know what she did, but they can't comprehend it emotionally. To them, their mother has always been loving and caring. They can't imagine her cold and distant like she was during the affair. Back then, she completely shut me out. Not just physically, but emotionally. She stopped doing little things. Morning kisses before work, random hugs, shared jokes, all gone. I realized something was off and eventually, with a close friend's help, uncovered the truth. She had been giving all that affection to someone else. I'll never forgive that. My daughters don't understand why, and honestly, I don't want them to. No child should ever have to carry that kind of pain. So when they talk about regret, forgiveness, or getting back together, I just can't relate. Where was all that love when it mattered? Update. It's been a while since my original post. A lot has changed. My daughters actually found that post by accident. I had no idea they were even on that site. One day, I came home from work and found them both in tears. They ran to me, hugged me, and begged me to forgive them. Apparently, they'd read one of my comments and learned the full extent of their mother's affair and how deeply it hurt me back then. We went through a lot of therapy together. Honestly, I never blamed them. They were just kids, manipulated by their mother, who used their love as a weapon. After a few months of family therapy, the psychologist told us we no longer needed weekly sessions, just occasional check-ins. My daughters and I became closer than ever. Their relationship with their mom, though, took a hit, understandably. I told them not to dwell on her mistakes. I've long since made peace with what she did. That's also something we worked through in therapy. I eventually had a serious talk with my ex, made it absolutely clear that the getting back together nonsense needed to stop. Whether she listened or not, I don't know, but at least she stopped bothering the girls with it. Or maybe they've learned to tune her out. Either way, as long as my daughters are okay, I don't care what she's doing. As things settled, Clemence and my daughter started bonding, really bonding. They started talking to her more, even asking her for advice on girl stuff.
The first time I saw that, I nearly cried. Not long after, Clements and the girls surprised me. They organized a private dinner, just the three of us. Then Clements proposed to me. Yeah, she beat me to it. I was stunned, but happier than I had been in years. Not just because of her proposal, but because my daughters helped her plan it. We had a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family, and now we're expecting a baby. My daughters can't wait to become big sisters, and I honestly can't wait to watch them spoil their new sibling rotten.
My grandma gave me a penthouse for my birthday, but my mom tried to take it away to please her new husband. Hi everyone. 3 days ago, I turned 15, and my grandma gave me the most unbelievable gift. She signed over the deed to her penthouse apartment to me. She doesn't even live there full time. She has a house in the suburbs and only stays in the penthouse when she comes into the city. I was over the moon. It felt like, for the first time in a long while, something good was happening in my life. Because honestly, this last year has been absolute hell. It started when my dad walked out. He'd always been a complete workaholic, barely around, but the divorce still blindsided me. My mom never even told me directly. One day, I just noticed he was gone. Later, I found out he had already filed for divorce almost a year before. By the time I realized what was happening, it was basically over. He didn't even say goodbye to me, just left me one last message: be good. That was it. I haven't seen him since. When the divorce finalized, Mom got the house and full custody of me and my little brother. Dad technically had visitation rights, but he never used them. He just vanished from my life. Then about 2 months ago, Mom dropped another bomb. She'd been dating someone, let's call him Robert, for a few months, and now they were engaged. I barely had time to process that she was even seeing someone before she announced he'd be my stepdad. It felt rushed, forced, and honestly pretty desperate. How do you even know someone well enough in 5 months to marry them? When I finally met him, he seemed distant and cold with me. With my 4-year-old brother, though, completely different. Playful, warm, like he was auditioning for best stepdad ever. At first, I brushed it off as him just being more comfortable with little kids. But a couple of weeks later, Mom sat me down and told me the real reason behind their whirlwind engagement. Robert had been offered a new job in another state. They were moving. And here's the kicker. They planned to take my little brother, but leave me behind with my grandma. When I asked why, Mom basically admitted it was Robert's idea. He wanted my brother because he was still young enough to bond with, but me, at 15, I was too old to ever become his real daughter. Plus, apparently, I'd upset him when I said 5 months wasn't long enough to know someone before marrying them. He decided I was stuck in the past and would never accept him, and my mom agreed. She told me I'd be better off staying with Grandma, that it would be easier. I can't describe the pain I felt in that moment. My dad had already abandoned me, and now my mom was essentially choosing her new husband over me. I love my grandma dearly, and moving in with her wasn't the issue. She's the kindest, most compassionate woman I know. But to hear my own mother say I wasn't wanted, that crushed me. I told her I didn't want to wait until the move. I wanted to live with Grandma immediately. Within a few days, I'd packed my things and left. Those last couple of days at Mom's house were silent. I didn't speak to her, didn't hug her goodbye. Honestly, I didn't think she deserved it. The only person I said goodbye to was my little brother, because I knew I'd miss him like crazy. Now I'm at Grandma's, and life already feels lighter. She shows me real love, not conditional affection based on what some guy thinks. Even though the commute to school is longer, I don't care. It's worth it. Every night I call my brother to talk before bed. It hurts that I can only reach him through Mom, but I do it anyway, for him. For the first time in months, I feel like I might actually be okay. I don't really talk to my mom anymore. We only speak when it's absolutely necessary. 3 days ago, I had my birthday, but honestly, it wasn't me who organized anything. My grandma secretly put everything together. She found a couple of my close school friends through my Facebook, invited them along with some relatives, and surprised me with a little party at her house. I hadn't expected anything, so it lifted my spirits a bit.
especially after how down I'd been ever since Mom sent me to live with Grandma. But after we cut the cake, Grandma announced her gift to me, and I was completely stunned. She told everyone that for now, her lawyer would act as trustee of her apartment, but the moment I turn 18, full ownership will pass to me. It was the best news I'd gotten in ages. I didn't even think of telling it to my mom. Turns out, someone else did. Yesterday, I found out that one of the party guests must have told her. That evening, Mom called me, sounding way too cheerful for someone about to drop a bomb. She said she knew about Grandma's gift, and that after talking with Robert, her husband, they decided he wanted to adopt me.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you to everyone who commented on my first post. Reading your replies really opened my eyes. You all pointed out things I hadn't even considered before. For example, that it never crossed my mind that my mom's relationship with Robert might have started before the divorce. Maybe she only admitted to it after the fact because it was easier that way. No one would suspect a thing once the divorce papers were signed. Honestly, I never even allowed myself to think my mom could cheat. But now, I'm not so sure. Either way, it doesn't matter anymore because she made it clear she doesn't want much to do with me. What really hurts is that I can't see or talk to my younger brother, and I miss him so much. We've always been close, and it breaks my heart that some of you might actually be right, that Robert could be his real dad. I try not to think about it, but once the idea was planted, it's been hard to shake. I've talked to my grandma a lot over the past couple of days. Neither of us knows for sure, but it's definitely changed how we see Mom. I think talking to my dad might clear some things up, but I don't know if he'd even want to go there with me. It's been 4 days since Mom last came over, and we haven't spoken since. She blocked me the same day, and later Grandma told me she blocked her too. That's so ungrateful, especially considering Grandma takes care of me without asking Mom for child support. She doesn't need to. She has her own money. She's doing this out of love, giving up her retirement to raise me. Mom should be grateful, but instead she cuts her off. I'm just filled with so much anger and so many questions I can't answer. I just hope that one day the truth finally comes out. Hi again. This one's going to be long because a lot happened tonight. My dad showed up. Apparently my grandma had reached out to him, but she didn't tell me because she wasn't sure if he'd actually come and didn't want to give me false hope. As soon as he found out Mom was engaged to Robert, he decided to come. And when he arrived, he hugged me and said he was sorry. Honestly, that alone shocked me. Then he sat me and Grandma down and told us everything. He admitted that he and Mom had been falling out of love for a long time, but they stayed together for me. Neither of them wanted to break the family. Then about 3 years ago, he started an affair with a coworker. He said he wanted to confess, but never had the courage. Eventually, Mom found out about it about a year ago, and that's when she filed for divorce. Here's the kicker. Mom told him she'd keep it a secret as long as he stayed away from us. She gave him a whole list of conditions. He had to give her the house outright. She got full custody of me and my brother, though technically he still had visitation rights, but he could only see us if she allowed it. On top of that, she demanded huge child support payments and a large share of the marital property, and he agreed to all of it. The only thing he asked in return was that she never expose his affair to me, because he didn't want me to see him as a cheater and hate him forever. So far, Mom had kept that secret, but the price was that I had no relationship with him. He also apologized for always being a workaholic, saying he never spent enough time with me or built a real bond. But he added that it wasn't only his fault. Mom always wanted more, and to keep up with the lifestyle she demanded, he had to work himself into the ground. He admitted that wasn't an excuse, but he wanted me to understand that the blame wasn't just on him. I guess I get that, but it's still a lot to process. Then he explained why he had broken his promise to her and showed up anyway. In the message my grandma had left him, she had mentioned Robert and asked if Dad knew him. That's what made him rush over immediately. Not only did Dad know Robert, he knew exactly what kind of man Robert was, and he wanted to warn us. Turns out my parents and Robert were all part of the same college group. Mom and Dad were already dating back then,
but Robert had always been into her. Right before graduation, when they all went out drinking, Robert confessed his feelings. Mom rejected him since she was with Dad, but she only told Dad about it 2 weeks later, admitting she was confused about her feelings. That led to them taking a break for nearly 2 months. During that time, she even went on a couple of dates, including with Robert. It didn't last, and eventually she got back with Dad. When they reconciled, Dad asked her not to keep contact with Robert because it bothered him. At first, she agreed, but later that same year, he found out she had still been talking to him. It turned into a huge fight, almost breaking them up. Not long after, Robert actually showed up at Dad's place, and they ended up in a physical fight because Robert thought it would somehow impress Mom. Instead, it disgusted her, especially since she'd already made it clear she only wanted to be friends. After that, she cut him off completely. According to Dad, Robert was always unstable and a pretty awful person. After college, he left town and no one heard from him for years. Dad suspects Mom and Robert reconnected a couple of years ago, since she once mentioned hearing he had moved back. He's not sure when they actually started seeing each other again, but the fact that they're engaged now basically proves she cheated too, which means all the divorce conditions she had forced on him technically lose their...
I'm refusing to go on a family vacation because my sister expects me to look after her kids again. I even had to move out of my parents' house earlier because I was constantly being pulled into babysitting my 3 nieces and nephews. Despite that, last year I still ended up acting like a helper, or even the main nanny during our family trip. For example, last summer we went to the beach. My parents paid for my hotel, but I had to share a room with 3 loud boys because my sister and her husband wanted their own space. I was promised I'd have time for myself, but instead I spent almost all my free time taking care of the kids. When I complained, everyone reminded me that I wasn't paying for the trip. In the end, we only did one thing I actually wanted, visiting an art gallery. I enjoy that kind of thing on vacation, but the kids were bored. This year, my parents planned another similar trip in June and expected everything to be the same. I refused. I told them I would drive separately and pay for my own hotel so I could have my own space. They were surprised and brought up the cost, but I explained that I have a stable job and can afford it. That led to arguments, but I explained my reasons clearly. I want to enjoy a vacation like an adult, not spend it like a babysitter. My parents told my sister, and she immediately called me, yelling that I would ruin everything if I didn't help her with the kids. I finally snapped and reminded her how last year I was dragged into her chaos, barely able to do anything for myself, and even made to feel guilty for wanting something simple like visiting an art gallery. I told her I deserve a proper vacation too. Now she refuses to talk to me, and my parents are still trying to convince me to go along just to avoid conflict. I'm standing my ground, even though the pressure is growing. I understand it won't be easy for them without help, but I don't think I'm wrong for setting boundaries. Let me know what you think. Am I right, or is my sister justified since she has 3 kids to take care of? Update 1. About an hour after I posted, my sister somehow found it. She wasn't just angry at me, she was upset that people in the comments didn't support her. She had a meltdown talking about how hard it is to raise triplets and insisting that I, as someone young and independent, should help her. I didn't change my position, and now I'm expecting a call from my parents since she already reached out to them. Update 2. After work, I can add more details. Things have mostly settled now. My parents saw my post and were shocked by how many people responded. Yes, they were upset that I posted it, but I told them if they had listened to me earlier, it wouldn't have been necessary. I was tired of always being the one expected to sacrifice for family peace. Eventually, my parents confronted my sister. The trip was canceled anyway since nothing had been booked yet, but now they're arguing with her. She blames me, and the kids are disappointed because they won't go to the beach. She even called me during lunch and implied that I don't have my own life, so I should help her. I recorded that conversation and showed it to my parents, which made them even more upset with her. A few days later, they told me they would never force me to babysit again and admitted that last year's situation was unfair. Now they're angry at my sister for saying I should help just because I have no life.
Meanwhile, her husband has stepped back from the chaos and spends most of his time at work. Update 3. My parents have apologized, but my sister hasn't yet. At least as of a week ago, she refused. This whole situation basically exposed deeper issues in our family. For context, my parents and sister got used to me helping with her triplets. I lived with my parents until I was 22 to save money during college. I had a scholarship, but staying at home made things easier, and I'm grateful for that. But after graduating, everyone assumed I had unlimited free time. That's when they convinced me to go on that family trip. During that trip, I was responsible for 3 6-year-old boys and even had to share a room with them. They didn't listen to me at all. I even had to call their mom multiple times just to get them to behave. Yet, whenever I wanted to do something for myself, I was treated like the problem. If my plans didn't match the rest of the family, they were ignored. It felt completely unfair. I was part of the family, but my opinion didn't matter. After that trip, I spoke honestly with my parents, and they admitted they were wrong. By the end of the summer, I moved out without telling anyone in advance. I had already secured a good job after an internship, and moving closer to work reduced my commute significantly. My sister was especially unhappy because she lost her regular free babysitter, but she still tried to pressure me into helping. Sometimes I gave in when she offered things like pizza, and it became expected. When my parents suggested another trip to the same place, I immediately recognized it would be the same situation again. If I accepted their offer to pay, I'd be stuck babysitting. So I told them calmly I would go independently and pay for myself. That's when everything escalated. My parents started pleading, and my sister tried to pressure me emotionally, but I refused. After I posted about it, my family initially turned against me. My parents even called me while reading my post. I asked them if anything I wrote was untrue. They tried to say it was exaggerated, but I pointed out specific details that proved otherwise. I told them to look at the comments, even though there were too many to read fully. The number kept growing quickly, which shocked them and made them reconsider their actions. My sister also tried calling me repeatedly during work. I finally answered at lunch. She complained that my post turned her parents against me. After their argument, my parents canceled the trip. At first, they tried to blame me for it, but later they admitted their mistake. They acknowledged it wasn't fair to treat me like free childcare, especially since I no longer lived with them. They also tried to justify things by reminding me I lived with them for free during college, but I pointed out that wasn't a valid argument. When my sister finally spoke to me, she revealed her mindset clearly, saying I had no life and should spend my weekends helping her because she was too tired to manage everything. She's a stay-at-home mom, her husband earns well, and they live comfortably, but her kids are not my responsibility. She got angry and hung up. I had recorded the call and later showed it to my parents, which made them even more upset with her. A few days later, her husband stepped in and made her apologize. It was clear he hadn't realized the full situation before. He even believed she had been paying me for babysitting after I moved out. In reality, she barely covered anything, sometimes just gave money for pizza. It turned out she hadn't paid me properly for months. When this came up, her husband was furious, and she had to pay me everything she owed from her savings. After that, he apologized to me for not stepping in earlier and said they would hire a proper babysitter from now on.
A few days later, we had a family meeting at my parents' house. Everyone apologized to me again. After that, my parents confirmed that the family vacation was still happening. And yes, I'm still going on my own terms, driving separately and paying for my own hotel room. I made it clear that if my sister even tries to push childcare onto me again,
I'll switch hotels. I told her directly, and she promised it wouldn't happen. So, if there's no update a month after the trip, it means everything went fine. Update 4. My sister called me demanding that I delete my posts. She had realized how widely the story had spread and couldn't handle the backlash anymore. She asked if people were still commenting, and I told her honestly, yes, around 10 new comments a day, and most of them are criticizing her. She broke down crying and begged me to take everything down. I refused. I told her those posts are the only reason she can't treat me like garbage anymore. She acted like my entire life should revolve around hers. She didn't even properly pay me for babysitting, kept money for herself, and turned me into a full-time nanny during last year's vacation. It's no surprise people reacted negatively. When I mentioned I had even made a video about the situation, she completely lost it and hung up. Later, my parents called, asking me to delete the posts too. I refused again and explained that none of this would have happened if they had supported me earlier. I told them clearly, I'm not her servant, nanny, or handyman. I'm her brother, and I'm an adult. Eventually, they backed off, but still asked me to remove everything. I told them I wouldn't unless they started standing up for me more often. My sister created this situation with her entitlement, and now she has to deal with it. I also made it clear I have my own life, my career, and I want to move forward. If they keep enabling her, it will only make things worse. The only way to stop this is to end the entire situation. My posts are anonymous, and I have every right to speak about what happened. My mom ended up crying, my dad stayed quiet, and I told them their emotions wouldn't change my decision. They know what needs to be done. Stop supporting her behavior. Soon after, my sister called again, furious because our parents told her they wouldn't step in anymore and that she had to handle things herself. They also told her to treat me better. I responded sarcastically, and when I hung up, she was crying again. Later, her husband called me to hear my side. He wasn't happy that I kept posting, but after I explained everything, he said he would talk to her again. Hopefully, that would calm things down. The vacation was still planned for the end of June. I had already booked my room on a completely different floor, far from my family. I made it clear, unless it was a planned family activity, I would spend my time however I wanted, visiting galleries, trying local food, and actually enjoying myself. The trip itself had ups and downs. The good part, my parents no longer tried to push me into babysitting. My sister did try, though. She even attempted to find out which room I was staying in, but failed. Before arriving, I had already informed the hotel staff not to give out any information about me. They confirmed it. At the day of departure, I left earlier than everyone else. I knew they wouldn't be ready on time, so I left at 9 a.m., even though check-in was later. My parents were annoyed because they had planned a group breakfast, but I told them I hadn't been informed. At the hotel, I double-checked with the staff about my privacy. Later, I found out my family had indeed tried to get my room number, but the staff refused. My sister tried to pressure them, but her husband stopped her. When we met later, everything seemed normal. At one point during an outing, my sister asked me to watch the kids. I immediately refused. I knew her trick. Just a minute would turn into an hour. Her husband backed me up and told her to stop. She started crying, saying she needed a break, but he reminded her he was tired too. My mom gave me a look, so I went up to her and said clearly if she expected me to babysit, I would leave the vacation immediately. That ended the discussion. After that, neither my mom nor my sister tried again. At the hotel, I avoided sharing elevators and kept distance. My room was far away, and I made sure no one followed me. The next day, I spent most of my time alone, only joining them for specific plans, like visiting the aquarium.
She called us, screaming that we destroyed her family. Her exact words to my husband were,
I worked for years to keep this family together. I forgave everyone for everything they ever did. And this is how you repay me? By letting some bitch tear us apart? So yeah, that bridge is gone. Ted's coping the best he can. He's in therapy too, working through his guilt and grief. He keeps apologizing, even though I know none of this was his fault. He said that what his best friend and brother did to me will haunt him for a long time. We've been reading some of your comments together. He's thankful for everyone who sees him as someone trying to make amends, but he says he hasn't earned forgiveness yet. He believes it'll take years to truly make things right. He even told me that he'd understand if I wanted a divorce, that he couldn't live with himself knowing what his family did to me. But I told him no, I still love him deeply, and I know he isn't responsible for what happened. We'll see how therapy goes, for both of us. Where's Ash now? He's still under psychiatric supervision. He's asked to see Ted, but Ted refuses. He did send him a letter, though. I don't know what's in it, and I don't want to. Ted assured me that I'll never have to see Ash again. Once doctors deem it safe, he'll be transferred to the West Coast, where the rest of the family can deal with him. Brother number 3 is currently overseeing his condition and agrees it's best to keep him far away from us. Ted still discusses the medical updates with him, but I stay out of it, and that's perfectly fine by me. Following your advice, Ted and I took a break. I quit one of my jobs and switched to remote work for the other. We've been staying at my dad's seaside apartment while Ted's on leave. His boss has been very understanding. It's mid-January now, the gloomy weather, but the ocean view helps calm my mind. Being far from all that madness has been healing. I also changed my phone number so Ted's family can't reach me anymore. And honestly, it's the best decision I've made. It's just me, Ted, and our cat here now. I've filed for a restraining order against Ash. I'm not sure what legal steps brother number 1 is taking for his daughter, but I know he made her delete her social media accounts. If there are further actions, that's their call. We're moving soon. Not sure where yet, but both of us know that our current house no longer feels like home. Over the next few weeks, we'll start looking for a new place closer to my family. As for what was in the locked guest bathroom, sorry to disappoint, but there were no body parts or horror movie scenes. It was just more of the same stuff they'd already found in the main bathroom. I don't think Ash is some serial killer in the making. He's just a severely disturbed man with self-destructive coping mechanisms and deeply unhealthy attachments. One commenter suggested he might have deep-rooted hatred or distorted view of women, and honestly, I agree. All of his disturbing behavior was directed at women, me, his niece, and even his cat, Sunny. But again, I'm not a professional. How am I doing? It depends on the day. Some days are easier, some aren't. I have therapy sessions every other day. And thank you to those who suggested bringing white noise or headphones into the bathroom. It's actually helped a lot. My sisters take turns visiting me, so I'm rarely alone for long. Many of you asked what Ash's childhood was like, what could have caused this. These are Ted's words. When you grow up with 8 older brothers, you become an easy target for criticism, comparisons, and impossible expectations. When the older ones needed somewhere to unload their frustration, Ash was the weakest, the one they picked on. I'm not excusing anything, but there were things even I couldn't protect him from. Now, as an adult, I see how messed up it all was, and so do my brothers. We each have our own demons to fight. We didn't have a supportive family. Everything was swept under the rug instead of being addressed. It left us broken, unable to tell right from wrong. Some of us got better, thanks to our partners, jobs, and experience, but we still have a long way to go. We can't undo the past. All we can do is acknowledge it and try to be better tomorrow. Why didn't anyone check on his cat sooner? Because there was no reason to suspect anything. Sunny was never a very social cat, so during lockdown video call,
Update 3, Unique and Translated Version. Hey everyone, it's been about 2 months since all this chaos started. During that time, I've gotten tons of messages and comments asking for an update, most of them kind and supportive.
Of course, there were a few nasty ones too, but at this point, I've made peace with the fact that it's just part of internet culture. First off, sorry it took me so long to write this. I know many of you are curious about what's been happening with Ted's family, but I really needed time to process everything. Anyway, here's another miserable little piece of the puzzle so you can finally get some closure. So, Ted asked me to move out for a while. He's been struggling a lot emotionally and said my presence was only making things harder for him. He's drowning in guilt, and dealing with all those skeletons from his family's closet is too heavy for anyone. We're not officially divorced, but we're not looking for a new place together either. We're still in the process of selling our old house. Ted's living there, and I've been staying with my parents. I honestly don't know what will happen once the house is sold, or what he really wants, but I promised to give him space. He did allow me to post this update, though, because despite some hateful messages, most of you have been incredibly kind and supportive. Now, as promised, here's the updated version of Ted's family tree, including the sisters. Brother number 1, doctor with a military background, married, 3 kids. Brother number 2, surgeon, married, has 2 dogs and a bearded dragon. Brother number 3, engineer, engaged, 1 dog. Brother number 4, teacher and researcher, married, 1 child. Sister number 1, deceased. Brother number 5, works in IT, married, not many details. Brother number 6, doctor, single, open to dating. Brother number 7, chef or businessman, married, 1 kid. Brother number 8, car salesman, married, 3 kids and some fish. Sister number 2 and 3, both deceased. Brother number 9, married, possibly divorced now, 1 cat. Brother number 10, Ash. Now, about the sisters, I only mentioned them this time because, well, the family story is already insane, and this just adds another layer. I didn't include them earlier because Ted never talks about them. For him, they've simply never existed. All 3 sisters were born and passed away before Ted was even conceived, so in his mind, he only has brothers. You guys came up with some wild theories, some surprisingly close to the truth, some totally unhinged. But honestly, given what we know about this family, a bit of insanity seems to run in their blood. Anyway, no, the sisters weren't murdered. Sister number 2 and 3 were twins who died shortly after birth due to a developmental defect. Their lungs never fully formed. That's all Ted knows. I don't talk to his family anymore, so I can't confirm more details. Sister number 1 died in a motorcycle accident. One of the brothers was driving, underage and drunk. I didn't mention this before because it wasn't my story to tell. It had nothing to do with my situation, and I still believe people deserve privacy, so I'm not saying which brother it was. Many of you also asked about the dark secrets Ted's mother supposedly forgave her sons for. I'll share only what's been openly discussed before. I won't name which brother did what, except for brother number 7, since I already told his story. So here's what I know. Brothers 1 to 4 were the classic golden boys, smart, athletic, high-achieving. That set the bar ridiculously high for the younger ones. The family expected every child to excel in school, sports, get a scholarship because paying for 10 college educations wasn't realistic, and build a successful career. But brother number 7 wanted none of that. He's a smart guy, but thought it was unfair that his life had to be a constant competition with his siblings. After high school, he told his parents he was going abroad to study culinary arts. His scholarship supposedly covered part of his tuition, but not housing. His parents were thrilled. Their son was going to become a world-famous chef. They agreed to help with expenses, as long as he kept good grades and cooked at family gatherings. In reality, he moved to New York, shared an apartment with 4 roommates, and pretended to live abroad. This was before video calls were common, so it wasn't hard to pull off. He just needed to call his parents at times that matched the time zone difference. He even made up stories for family holidays. His parents sent him money for tuition and rent, but he invested it and eventually made a decent profit. Years later, he returned to the West Coast claiming he was managing restaurants. The truth came out only when one of the nieces said she wanted to apply to the same school and asked him about it. By then, he was already financially stable, so there weren't major consequences. And to be fair, the man can really cook. He still handles Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners. Now, for the rest of the family drama, things I learned from Ted, his mom, or the brothers themselves, and for whom none of them were ever punished. Stealing and completely wrecking at least 2 cars, the same brother, both times. Another brother also stole a car. Leaving their grandmother alone for a week, even though they were supposed to care for her. Stealing and selling things from their own home. Fistfights that ended with police involvement. Other fights that didn't involve police but did end with hospital visits. Skipping major school events, stealing trip money, or pocketing class funds. Public nudity, indecent behavior, and urinating in public, apparently a family tradition. One stalking incident that ended with a restraining order. Frequent teenage drinking and underage drunk driving. As for their father, last time I saw him, he was in an urn on his mother's mantle, hopefully still there. In life, he was an awful, misogynistic, abusive husband and father. Somehow, though, he managed to act like a decent grandpa. And before anyone judges, why did you let the kids near him? That's not on me. I don't have children. Ted's siblings do. Ted's parents were, and his mother still is, very traditional. They only ever cared about appearances, the image of a perfect family, with proud sons and beautiful daughters. I'm not excusing them, but losing their daughters really broke them and the whole family dynamic. As for why they had more kids after that, they desperately wanted another girl. They tried twice more, then couldn't have children anymore. I don't know if they would have kept trying or if the infertility made things emotionally worse. As for Ash, I honestly don't know how he's doing. I'd love to say I don't care, but I do a little. Therapy has made me more empathetic, and I can see that he's a sick person. I just hope he gets better, far, far away from me. And that's pretty much everything I can tell you about Ted's family. Big shout out to brother number 6, though. He's been supportive throughout all of this. Still single, by the way, and made me promise to mention that. So if anyone on the West Coast is looking for a kind, attractive doctor from an absolutely bonkers family, here's your chance. As for me, things are still rough. I had to quit my second job after already leaving the first one. So yeah, I'm unemployed and living with my parents right now. But my dad says he doesn't care as long as I'm okay, and I love him for that. I'm still going to therapy. It's the one thing keeping me grounded these days.
I stopped a kidnapping while delivering pizza. I work as a pizza delivery driver, and one night turned into one of the strangest and most intense experiences of my life. It was a crazy shift, non-stop orders driving all over the city without a single real break. I had been drinking water all evening because of the heat, and of course, I didn't make time to use the restroom. By the time I got close to my next delivery, the urge hit me like a truck. Luckily, I was nearly at the customer's address. I thought I'd drop the pizza off quickly, then deal with the problem. But when I pulled up, things immediately felt wrong. I'd been to that neighborhood before, even that house. But this time, all the windows were dark, not even the glow of a TV inside. The entire street was eerily quiet. This was a college area, so sure, not many students were around in July, but still, somebody had ordered this pizza. I wasn't about to step out of the car and walk up to a pitch-black house. It was around 9:30 p.m., still hot outside, even though the sun had set hours ago. My car's AC barely worked, and the pizza boxes weren't helping. I called the number on the order.
At first, all I heard was heavy, uneven breathing, then a shaky, "Hello?" I tried to keep it professional. "Hey, I'm outside with your pizza, but it doesn't look like anyone's home." The voice gasped, I'm not there. Not yet." Annoyed and very distracted by my full bladder, I snapped back harsher than I should have. "Well, if you're not here, I'll have to cancel the order. You were supposed to pay cash. Next time, plan better." Almost immediately, I regretted it. The voice grew clearer. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. Out of breath, she explained, "Oh my God, I was running home. I almost didn't hear you. I just switched off my AirPods. Is this better? I lost track of time at work, but I knew you'd be coming, so I'm literally sprinting back right now. Please, please don't leave. I'm starving and I don't have a car. Just 5 minutes, I promise." Hearing her voice jogged my memory. I had delivered here before, and she was always polite. Now I felt like a jerk for barking at her. I told her it was fine, that I'd wait, and hung up. But the bathroom situation was reaching emergency levels. No trees, no hidden corners. And like an idiot, I had tossed out an empty bottle earlier. The only option was the row of bushes by her front walkway. No lights outside, no one around, my car parked across the street, and thankfully, my job didn't require a uniform. I figured I'd be quick and no one would notice. I hurried to the thickest bush right near the front door, unzipped, and finally started to relieve myself. But almost immediately, I realized something was off. The sound wasn't right. It wasn't hitting dirt. It was solid. Before I could process it, a muffled male voice barked, "What the hell?" And a man suddenly burst out of the bush. He ran past me, wiping himself off. I must have hit him directly. My eyes adjusted enough to make out his shape, build, and clothes, but he disappeared before I could react. A minute later, I heard the screech of tires down the street. That's when it clicked. That girl had said she was running home, alone, at night, and some guy had been hiding in her bushes by the door. If I hadn't been desperate enough to relieve myself right there, I don't even want to think what might have happened. I was so stunned that I didn't even zip up. I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what the hell had just happened. The reality of it was so terrifying that my brain refused to accept it, desperately searching for some logical explanation that would make it all seem normal. I wondered maybe the bushes led to a backyard and only looked like they were up against the house. Maybe they covered an open basement window or something. But then that voice in my head screamed, "Dude, that guy was wearing a hoodie in 90-degree Fahrenheit. That is not normal. He's bad news. You're in real danger." The thought that I'd been just a couple of steps away from some man hiding in the bushes outside a young woman's home at night sent a chill down my spine. My fight-or-flight response completely broke down because instead of running, my dumb brain decided to do the absolute worst thing possible. I walked closer to investigate. There had to be a reasonable explanation, right? Some non-creepy reason for a guy in a hoodie to be crouched in the dark shrubs? I circled around, turned on my phone flashlight, and aimed it behind the bushes. But if something looks scary in the dark, trust me, shining a beam of light on it can make it 100 times worse. That's when I saw it. A bag. It was an old, beat-up drawstring backpack, a little damp from, well, yeah, I'd accidentally splashed it. Still in a fog of shock, I reached for it, thinking, okay, maybe this explains it. Maybe he's homeless. Maybe he was just resting here. But when I opened the bag, reality hit me like a truck. Inside were a sharp hunting knife, a roll of duct tape, and a bottle of pills. At that moment, every illusion I'd been clinging to shattered. My body flipped into full survival mode. Adrenaline and instinct kicked in like never before. Gone was the frozen, confused idiot. I became laser-focused on one single goal: get to the car. I dropped the bag like it was on fire, bolted across the street, jumped into my car, and floored it before the door had even shut. I didn't stop until I hit a red light several blocks away. Only then did I pull over in the lot of a 24-hour pharmacy, shaking uncontrollably, trying to catch my breath. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, the first question hit me. Do I call the cops first, or the girl who lives there. I mulled it over for what felt like 10 seconds, but when I glanced at the clock, an entire hour had passed. My brain was still scrambled. Eventually, I told myself, all right, I'm safe in my locked car with the engine running. If anything goes down, I can drive away. But she might not know what's waiting for her. So I started dialing her number. Then a horrifying thought stopped me cold. What if there is no girl? Sure, I was 90% sure I'd delivered here before, but what if I was mistaken? What if the girl on the phone was just bait, a setup to lure me into a trap? Every pizza delivery driver alive has heard of the evil genius case. I replayed the phone call in my head. She'd been panting, said she wasn't home, begged me not to leave. The whole thing was weird, way too weird. Nope, can't risk it. Call the cops first. So I dialed 911. The operator was calm, professional, thank God, because by then I was completely falling apart. I kept rambling, tripping over my words, trying to explain 3 different points at once. You have to get there before the girl arrives. He wasn't waiting for me, he was waiting for her. But then again, maybe she doesn't even exist. But I did talk to someone on the phone, so if she is real, you need to find her because she has no idea what's happening. And listen, I only checked part of the bushes. There could be more than one of them. Oh, and you'll know the guy when you see him because, I peed all over him. Not on purpose, just... Long story. Finally, the dispatcher told me to stop talking and just stay on the line. And then, her number popped up on my phone. Incoming call. I couldn't answer without disconnecting 911, so I ignored it. Seconds later, a text came through. Hey, I'm here, but I don't see you. I blurted it out to the operator, and they said the officers were just a couple of minutes away from the address. But my stomach twisted with guilt. Rationally, I knew the odds of her being some kind of scammer were tiny. Much more likely, she was a real girl walking straight into a nightmare. I unmuted the line and said, I'm going back. I can't just sit here. They definitely didn't like that answer, but I had already turned the car around. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and the whole way I was muttering under my breath, shh, fuck, fuck, fuck. And then I saw her.
Dad gave me the best 18th birthday gift, but my jealous stepmom and her daughter burned my passport a day before the trip. Hi everyone, I turned 18 just a few days ago, and for my birthday, my dad surprised me with something incredible, my very first international trip to India, just the 2 of us. This trip was supposed to be something really special for so many reasons. My mom passed away when I was only 6. To cope with the loss, my dad and I used to watch Indian movies together all the time. They were colorful, uplifting, and helped brighten even the darkest days. That's how I fell in love with Indian culture. My mom loved those films too. She even had a collection of traditional Indian outfits, even though she never actually got to visit India herself. Before she died, she and my dad promised we'd go there as a family one day. Sadly, she passed away from a sudden brain aneurysm in her sleep before we could make that dream come true. She was only 32. After her death, it was just me and Dad. Watching movies together became our little ritual to keep her memory alive and stay close. Over the years, it made our bond stronger than ever. I know Mom would be proud of us today. That's why India has always held such a deep emotional meaning for both of us. It's not just a trip, it's a promise finally coming true. When Dad revealed at my birthday party that he'd booked the trip, I was ecstatic. I couldn't stop smiling. But not everyone was happy for me. My stepmom, Susan, and her daughter, Nadia, 17, looked like someone had slapped them. And sure enough, after the guests left, I overheard them arguing with my dad. From what I caught, Susan thought he should have postponed the trip so we could all go as a family. Honestly, I was relieved that it would just be the 2 of us. I don't get along with Susan or Nadia at all, and past family vacations with them were a nightmare. I couldn't imagine them ruining this one too, especially since it meant so much to me emotionally. Luckily, they had their own reasons not to join anyway. Nadia had her final exams and upcoming graduation, and Susan was tied up with an important project at work. Still, I can't help but feel Dad timed things perfectly so it could be just us, even if he'll never admit it. Susan and Nadia came into my life about 5 years ago. At first, everything seemed fine. They acted friendly enough when Dad was just dating Susan. But once he married her 2 years ago, things shifted.
Their attitude toward me became cold and strange for no reason I could figure out. I hadn't done anything differently, yet suddenly I was treated like an outsider in my own home. And now, well, let's just say their jealousy hit a whole new level. Things were already bad with my stepmom and stepsister, but what they did before my trip crossed every line. I was never close with Susan or Nadia, but at least in the beginning our relationship was civil and polite. That all changed after Dad married Susan. Suddenly, she started treating me like dirt, and Nadia copied every move her mother made. They'd talk down to me, make nasty little remarks, and act cruel, but only when Dad wasn't around. The moment he walked into the room, they'd flip the switch and turn into sweet, smiling angels. It was so fake it made my skin crawl. Eventually, I realized I needed to tell Dad what was going on. We sat down for a family talk, and at first, Susan and Nadia denied everything. Luckily, I had recorded one of our earlier conversations where they were openly horrible to me. With evidence on the table, they couldn't lie anymore. So instead of denying, they switched to emotional manipulation. They both burst into tears and told Dad they only acted that way because they felt like I hadn't accepted them as family, which was total nonsense. I did see them as family. It was them who treated me like garbage. Yet somehow they expected me to keep being nice to them while they showed me zero respect. Dad was confused and torn. Susan was the first woman he'd really cared for since Mom, and I knew he didn't want to lose that relationship so easily. He asked all of us to try harder to get along. For his sake, I agreed to keep things civil. After that, their behavior shifted again. Instead of being nice in front of Dad and cruel behind his back, they just chose to completely ignore me whenever he wasn't around. It was like I didn't exist. Honestly, I preferred it that way. At least they weren't actively tormenting me. For Dad's sake, we kept up the performance of being one happy family, and that carried on for about a year. Fast forward to just a few days ago, the morning after my birthday, Dad and I had breakfast together and I pulled him aside. I asked him straight out if Susan and Nadia were upset about not joining us on the India trip. He admitted they were, but also reminded me how much this trip meant to us, especially with it falling so close to Mom's death anniversary. He wanted this to be our special time together, just father and daughter. He promised he'd smooth things over with them later. That was fine by me. Honestly, vacations with Susan and Nadia were torture. Dad and I are explorers. We love walking around, sightseeing, soaking up every bit of culture. They, on the other hand, prefer to sit in the hotel and complain if we're even a little late for dinner. To me, that's not a vacation. That's being trapped. India was supposed to be different. India was supposed to be ours. I didn't think there was anything wrong with that, especially since Susan and Nadia had taken their own little trips together in the past without us. The only real difference was that ours was longer and farther away.
Turns out those papers were for Nadia's student loan. She needed Dad to co-sign so she could pay for college, since Susan hadn't saved a dime for her. Dad had been ready to help. Not anymore. That was his revenge. My passport for her college dream. Fair trade, honestly. Within an hour, Susan and Nadia were gone. They begged, pleaded, even got on their knees, but Dad didn't budge. Now, since the moment they left, they've been spamming me with texts, Nadia especially. She keeps begging me to convince Dad to reconsider, promising she'll do anything to make up for it. She claims they never knew Dad was going to co-sign her loan, and that they just lashed out because they felt excluded. I finally replied once. I reminded them that they've gone on plenty of mother-daughter trips without us, so why is it unfair when Dad and I wanted one trip alone, especially for my 18th birthday and in memory of my late mom? The truth is, Nadia still has her biological dad, even if he lives in another state and doesn't have custody. She still sees him sometimes. Me? My mom has been gone for years. That trip was supposed to be in her honor. And Susan and Nadia couldn't even let me have that. So no, I don't feel bad. What happened to Nadia was karma. Burning my passport was cruel. Losing Dad's support for her education, that was justice. Update. And now, honestly, Nadia has lost every right to ask me for anything, not even forgiveness. Still, she keeps messaging me, begging. I even tried blocking her, but for some reason I hesitated.
Maybe because part of me wondered if it was a little unfair to plan a trip just for me and Dad, leaving her and Susan behind. Their getaways usually last only 2 to 3 days, somewhere nearby, while ours was supposed to be 10 full days in India. That's a big difference. So here I am, asking, am I really the bad guy for wanting one international trip with my dad without my stepmother and stepsister? Well, before I continue, I'll just say what I think the answer is. No, not at all. This situation seems clear. I wasn't wrong. I wanted time with my dad, especially on my 18th birthday, and especially since it was in honor of my late mom. What Susan and Nadia did was cruel and manipulative, and it says more about them than about me. My dad, he's the one I feel bad for. He fell for a woman who clearly didn't respect me, and by extension, didn't really love him the way she should have. Update. A lot of people asked why we didn't call the cops after they destroyed my passport. The truth, it didn't even cross my mind at first. I was in shock, panicking, crying, and honestly, what would it have done? They would have just claimed it was an accident, dragged it out forever, and nothing would change. We didn't want that mess. Others also asked why I wasn't in college yet. I graduated high school last year and decided to take a gap year to figure myself out. I worked a few jobs, interned in journalism, and gained some experience in the field I want to study. Now I'm applying to schools, and luckily my grandparents have already promised to cover my tuition, so my dad doesn't have to stress about me. Nadia's situation was completely different, which is why Dad was planning to co-sign her student loan. But after what happened, well, you already know how that ended. As for our trip, today was supposed to be our flight to India. Instead, we stayed home and watched old movies we used to love. It wasn't the same, but honestly, it helped. I finally blocked both Susan and Nadia, and I don't regret it. They don't deserve my sympathy. You were all right. I was only second-guessing myself because I've been missing my mom and was in a very emotional state. But they betrayed me for no reason, and whatever happens to them now, they absolutely brought on themselves. Update. It's been 4 days since my last post, and today Dad came home from work with big news. He filed divorce. Afterward, we finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding for far too long. He admitted that he'd been selfish. He loved Susan and tried to convince himself it would work out, even when her behavior, and Nadia's, clearly proved otherwise. Instead of trying to repair things with me, they simply shut me out completely. That's not family. That's not love. Dad told me he finally realized he'd been clinging to something toxic, and it was damaging both of us. He deserved better. I deserved better. Maybe he did love her, but it was obvious she didn't love him enough to even tolerate me, and that's not the kind of woman he should spend his life with. Update. The reason Susan never truly accepted me was simple. She could never see me as part of her family. Deep down, she probably knew that for Dad, I would always come first, and that neither she nor Nadia could ever replace me. That jealousy and insecurity made her bitter, and eventually it poisoned everything. Dad may never fully understand why their behavior shifted so dramatically, because before the wedding they treated me kindly, but the moment the vows were said, it was like they became different people overnight. Dad admitted he ignored the
I nearly lost $900,000 during my divorce, but instead, I destroyed my cheating wife in court with shocking evidence. I work as an elementary school teacher, so my daily routine is very predictable. I have fixed hours at school, and every Tuesday we usually had staff meetings that ended around 6 p.m. That meant I normally got home by 7. My wife, Terry, whom I had been married to for over 30 years, would go to the gym every Tuesday evening. She always came back exhausted, so I usually prepared dinner while she showered and handled the house chores. But one day, my principal surprised us by canceling the meeting. It was only 3:30 p.m., and I thought it would be a great idea to head home early, cook dinner, and maybe catch up on some household tasks. Lately, I'd noticed Terry becoming more distant, and I hoped a candlelit dinner might help rekindle some spark between us. Our marriage had been strained by financial troubles, and I could feel her pulling away more and more. She wanted to control everything, and if things didn't go her way, she would become stubborn and irritable. I always thought of myself as patient, but it was starting to wear me down.
When I got home, I noticed her car in the garage. That was strange because she usually took the bus to the gym. I slipped in quietly through the back door. The first thing I saw was her purse sitting on the kitchen counter. Terry was always meticulous about where she placed her things, so this was odd. Then I noticed her workout clothes and a large towel on the floor. Just as confusion set in, I heard noises coming upstairs. My first thought was that she might not be feeling well, so I cautiously started up the stairs. That's when I stumbled over a pair of men's shoes. Scattered on the steps were pants, a shirt, socks, and worst of all, Terry's lingerie, the kind she only wore for anniversaries or special nights. My blood ran cold. I froze on the stairs, heart pounding, stomach turning. For a moment, I might faint. I sat down, trembling. Then anger began to boil inside me, an emotion I rarely allowed to take control. Years of teaching had given me patience, but this was beyond anything I could manage. I moved quietly toward the bedroom. To reach it, you had to pass through the walk-in closet. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see inside. And there it was, my wife, my partner of 3 decades, the mother of our children, betraying me in our own bed. I pulled out my phone and hit record. I knew I would need proof, not just for myself, but for the storm that was about to follow. Watching it unfold before my eyes was like living through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Terry, the woman who claimed to love me, who volunteered at charities, who acted like the perfect wife, was now just another liar. I couldn't watch anymore. I stopped recording, slipped out of the house, and just walked aimlessly. Eventually, I ended up in a park miles away. I sat on a bench, splashed some water on my face, and played the video back. The sound was low so nearby kids wouldn't hear, but on that screen was the collapse of my marriage, my family, my entire life. And there in the park, I broke down and cried. By the time I got back home, it was around 7 p.m., my usual return time on meeting days. Terry greeted me at the back door with fake concern. "Honey, are you okay? You look so pale. What happened? Do you want me to get you something to drink?" Her eyes were full of feigned worry, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. My voice shook as I muttered, "Not really. I think it's just my stomach. I'm gonna take a shower and sleep it off." "All right, but take a bucket in case you throw up. I don't want to ruin the clean sheets," she said casually. That almost broke me. Those clean sheets had already been ruined, stained by betrayal. I replied more firmly, "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." And that's exactly what I did. For the next few days, I pretended to be unwell. She went on with life as if nothing had happened, while I carried the weight of the recording in my pocket, the evidence that my marriage was nothing but ashes. When Monday came, I finally decided what to do next. I needed answers. Was this just a one-time betrayal, or had it been going on for a while? The next morning, I told the school principal that I had to undergo an unexpected medical procedure and wouldn't be able to teach for a few days. A substitute was arranged, which gave me the freedom I needed. On Tuesday, I left home as usual, but parked several streets away, then walked back quietly, cutting through neighbors' yards. I knew all the back routes and moved carefully so no one would notice me. I slipped into our detached garage and changed into casual clothes and soft shoes to keep silent. Then came the waiting. I remembered that the last time I'd come home early, there hadn't been any strange cars parked outside. That meant her lover probably came on foot. I crouched behind the hedge and bushes near our front entrance, hidden but with a clear view of the door. Terry carried on her morning as if everything was normal. Washing dishes, starting the dishwasher, vacuuming, dusting. Around 11:30, she went upstairs. I heard the shower running, followed by the toilet flushing. After about 45 minutes, she came back down and left the front door slightly open, an unspoken invitation for her guest. It didn't take long. Around 1:30, he showed up. I didn't know who he was at first, but I managed to capture about 10 seconds of video on my phone. It showed his side profile and almost a clear shot of his face. He didn't hesitate.
He just walked straight into my house. The first words I heard froze me in place. "I hope you're wearing that workout outfit again." "Of course," Terry replied with a giggle. "You always loved when I put it on. Sometimes I think that's what hooked you in the first place." That was all I needed. Their comfort with each other screamed of a long-term affair. They headed upstairs without a care in the world. I returned to the garage, my heart pounding out of my chest. My head was spinning with questions. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? And why hadn't she ever talked to me about anything? What terrified me more was the thought of my health. They hadn't used protection, at least not that I could see. The idea that she might have put me at risk made my stomach churn. I thought back to her years at the gym, the social circle of married women she had joined, and the charity events. Maybe the gym held the answers.
Update 1. Being a teacher came with one big advantage. I had access to printers and other resources. I decided to start by printing still frames from the video I had taken. Identifying him was now my top priority. On Thursday, when Terry was supposed to go to the gym again, I suggested going with her. I claimed I was thinking about getting a membership myself, especially since school was on break. She immediately grew uncomfortable and tried to talk me out of it. "It's really just a group of wives who chat more than work out," she insisted. but I didn't budge. So that Thursday, I walked into the gym with her. The moment I stepped inside, it felt like a scene from an old Western. Everyone turned to stare at me, whispering among themselves. Terry was visibly on edge, sneaking nervous glances toward the staff area. I tried to distract myself by walking around the facility. It was the usual setup, rows of machines, mirrors on the walls. Near the exit, I noticed a staff board with photos and contact info. At the top was the owner and director, Ms. Elizabeth West, followed by 2 women and 1 man. My blood went cold. The man was him, the lover. Under his photo, Philip Barnes, head of training programs, personal coach. As I memorized his number, I looked back toward the machines. Terry was gone. Panic struck me until I spotted her a few minutes later in a hushed but desperate conversation with none other than Philip. She stood partly hidden behind weight equipment, gesturing for him to leave. Then she quickly returned to her machine as if nothing had happened. She didn't realize I'd seen it all. I sat there, burning with rage, trying to keep my composure. When she came back over, she noticed my pale face and asked softly, "Are you okay? Is your blood sugar still low?" "I'm fine now. Are you ready to leave?" Before she could answer, the director's voice echoed through the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, the last training session of the day is canceled. Mr. Barnes suddenly felt unwell and had to go home." A wave of disappointment swept through the women in the gym. But I wasn't disappointed. For me, it only confirmed everything. Update 2. It seemed that workouts with Mr. Bont were a cornerstone for many women at that gym. That alone made me think this needed deeper investigation. When I glanced at Terry, she didn't show much reaction to the announcement of his sudden illness, but I could swear I saw her shoulders relax, as if a huge weight had been lifted. "Let's go," she said quickly, snatching her towel and gym bag from the storage area where everyone left their things during class. We were just stepping out when a woman approached us, someone I didn't immediately recognize. "Such a shame we couldn't finish today's session properly," she commented to Terry. Terry gave a brief "agreed" and headed toward the car, clearly signaling that she had no interest in chatting further. "See you later," she tossed over her shoulder before sliding into the car faster than I'd ever seen her move. The ride home was silent. Terry leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and deliberately slowed her breathing as though calming herself. She looked serene, almost too serene, and I couldn't help but think maybe I could use this relaxed moment to probe deeper. "That was a pretty interesting workout, dear. The place is really well equipped. No wonder you've stayed so toned all these years." "Thanks, honey," she replied softly. "You're absolutely right. The program's great, and I enjoy being there. The women are friendly, too. Too bad Mr. Bont wasn't around today." She caught herself too quickly, correcting, Philip Bont. "He usually finishes every session with those tough exercises that really push us to the limit. It's always disappointing when he's not around." Inside, my stomach twisted. I knew all too well how far he had been pushing her body, but outwardly I only muttered, maybe he'll be better by next Thursday. The thought of their next intimate encounter made me sick, but I shoved it down. The following week, I had playground duty at school during pickup time. For those unfamiliar, it's chaos. Kids rushing out, chatting with friends, scanning for parents, while we teachers try to keep order until each child is collected. Near the end of pickup, a car pulled up, and I instantly recognized the driver. It was the same woman who had tried speaking to Terry in the gym. "Hello," she said nervously. "Sorry, I'm new to all this and lost track of the time. My son Timothy's here, right?" That wasn't unusual. New parents often struggled with pickup procedures. I reassured her I'd get Timothy, while colleagues covered the remaining kids. I found him near his classroom, chatting with another student. "Hey Tim, your mom's here. Let's head to the pickup area." He looked puzzled. He was in the last year of elementary school, old enough to not lose track of time. "That's weird," he muttered. "Mom's usually busy with her fitness instructor on Friday afternoons. Back at my old school, she often didn't come until 5:30. The word fitness instructor hit me like a hammer. My heart pounded as I casually asked, "Oh, that's great she takes care of her health. Do you happen to know his name?" "Yeah, it's Bont or something like that. He works at the local gym but also does private lessons at home. That's who I want to be when I grow up. Mom always seems so happy and relaxed after training with him. We usually order takeout on Fridays because she doesn't have time to cook." I nearly lost my composure. This man wasn't just entangled with my wife, he was messing around with multiple women in town. Back at the car, his mother thanked me warmly for helping. "Not a problem," I said smoothly. "Part of the job. By the way, I don't think we've officially met. I'm Gerard D. Kids just call me Mr. D. Nice."
I am 48 years old. I have known Pat for a very long time. She is about the same age as me. As far back as I can remember, even when we were young, she was obsessed with the dream of having 5 children and living the perfect family life in a house with a white picket fence. In college, I gradually stopped communicating with her. Over time, it became clear that she was a person without principles. She was manipulative, pushy, and constantly tried to make people feel sorry for her. Her behavior often seemed both unpleasant and ridiculous at the same time. I lived my life peacefully and barely thought about her for many years, but one day Pat found me on Facebook. Out of politeness, I accepted her friend request. It turned out that she had become the mother of 5 children and was raising them with a completely permissive parenting style. The kids did whatever they wanted, and she never stopped them. Moreover, she forced her daughters to call me aunt. Pat tried to send her children to my house without warning, constantly called me, tried to occupy all my time, and even began showing up at my workplace. I tried to set boundaries, but she constantly found ways to get around them. My husband and I organized small gatherings for new people in our community. In fact, it was a support initiative. We helped homeless people and those who had found themselves in difficult circumstances. Our community's base was located on a farm that belonged to an elderly couple. There was a large barn, a nice open area, and a green meadow with a small artificial lake. Sometimes weddings were held there. Pat began showing up actively at our gatherings. She never missed an event and tried to take part in all the organizational matters, but her children behaved terribly. During one party, they even ended up in my bedroom, even though there was a separate entertainment area for children. We had to watch them the whole time, so my husband and I couldn't even properly enjoy our own party. A few days later, Pat called me and tried to talk about her children's behavior, but she interrupted me and started talking only about herself. In the end, she announced that her children wanted to come over again and use our pool. I simply stayed silent. Soon afterward, her middle daughter called me and said that her mother had allowed her to spend the entire summer at our house. I had to explain to the child that it wasn't true. Over time, more and more disturbing stories about Pat began to appear. On social media, people complained that she would ask them to watch her children for a couple of hours, but then leave them there for the entire day. Others wrote that she borrowed money and never paid it back. Once, she volunteered to help wrap Christmas gifts for children from low-income families. After that, several nice toys disappeared. Later, they accidentally appeared under her own Christmas tree. There was also an incident at Casey's birthday party. My daughter went there for the celebration, but in the evening she called me in tears. She was ignored the entire time because she hadn't brought Casey the expensive gift that Casey had essentially demanded. When I arrived to pick her up, my daughter was sitting alone inside the house while everyone else was having fun outside. Later, the situation became even worse. When my daughter turned 13, I allowed her to wear my grandmother's antique ring. It wasn't expensive, but it had great sentimental value for our family. A
A few days later, I noticed that my daughter had become quiet and withdrawn. She didn't want to go to school, but she wouldn't explain why. Later, her friend told the truth. Pat's eldest daughter, Casey, asked to try on the ring and simply never returned it. Then she said she had accidentally lost the jewelry. In reality, she wore it to school and even spread rumors that my daughter had supposedly tried to steal the ring. When I learned the truth, I was furious. After school, I approached Pat's car and asked Casey to show me her hand. She tried to hide the ring, but I simply took it off her finger. On the inside, there was an engraving with my grandmother's maiden name. Pat started screaming and claimed that my daughter had given the ring to her daughter herself. Then she said they had actually bought it, but it was obvious that it was a lie. Later, Pat called me and began accusing me of humiliating her daughter and destroying her confidence. I never heard an apology. Her husband, Hank, was a completely different person. He worked several jobs to support the family and always looked exhausted. Pat pressured him, manipulated him, and demanded that he have more children with her. Over time, it became clear that he was in a deep depression. In our community, there was a woman named Lena who organized a program to help brides. She collected donated wedding dresses and gave them to women who couldn't afford to buy a new one. One day, Pat decided to renew her wedding vows with her husband and hold a new wedding ceremony. She literally pushed another couple out of their reserved date at the farm, insisting that her celebration had to take place on that exact day. Then she fell in love with one particular dress that had already been reserved for another bride. Eventually, Pat simply switched the packages and sent that girl a different dress. When she was exposed, she claimed that it was her dress. After that, Lena banned her from even entering the dress storage. But a few weeks before the ceremony, Lena accidentally discovered that Pat had still kept that exact dress for herself. That evening, Lena and I secretly went into the room where it was hanging. Lena took out a pair of scissors and simply cut out the entire back part of the dress. Then she carefully hung it back inside the garment bag. The next morning, Pat called me in hysterics. She was crying and saying her dress was ruined. She even asked to borrow my wedding dress. I refused. In the end, Lena brought her an old, huge, and very strange dress from the storage collection. Pat was furious, but she had no other choice. At the ceremony, she looked absolutely miserable. The dress was far too big, wrinkled, and strange. She kept holding it up with her hand so she wouldn't step on the hem. There were very few guests. People had simply grown tired of her behavior. After that incident, Pat changed a lot. She became quieter and started avoiding everyone. Soon, her husband Hank sought help from a psychologist. Gradually, he began to look much calmer and eventually moved out to live with his parents. After some time, he filed for divorce. Pat slowly distanced herself from our community, removed many acquaintances from her social media, and almost stopped appearing at gatherings. I am 48 years old. I have known Pat for a very long time. She is about the same age as me. As far back as I can remember, even when we were young, she was obsessed with the dream of having 5 children and living the perfect family life in a house with a white picket fence. In college, I gradually stopped communicating with her. Over time, it became clear that she was a person without principles. She was manipulative, pushy, and constantly tried to make people feel sorry for her. Her behavior often seemed both unpleasant and ridiculous at the same time. I lived my life peacefully and barely thought about her for many years, but one day Pat found me on Facebook. Out of politeness, I accepted her friend request. It turned out that she had become the mother of 5 children and was raising them with a completely permissive parenting style. The kids did whatever they wanted, and she never stopped them. Moreover, she forced her daughters to call me aunt. Pat tried to send her children to my house without warning, constantly called me, tried to occupy all my time, and even began showing up at my workplace. I tried to set boundaries, but she constantly found ways to get around them. My husband and I organized small gatherings for new people in our community. In fact, it was a support initiative. We helped homeless people and those who had found themselves in difficult circumstances. Our community's base was located on a farm that belonged to an elderly couple. There was a large barn, a nice open area, and a green meadow with a small artificial lake. Sometimes weddings were held there. Pat began showing up actively at our gatherings. She never missed an event and tried to take part in all the organizational matters, but her children behaved terribly. During one party, they even ended up in my bedroom, even though there was a separate entertainment area for children. We had to watch them the whole time, so my husband and I couldn't even properly enjoy our own party. A few days later, Pat called me and tried to talk about her children's behavior, but she interrupted me and started talking only about herself. In the end, she announced that her children wanted to come over again and use our pool. I simply stayed silent. Soon afterward, her middle daughter called me and said that her mother had allowed her to spend the entire summer at our house. I had to explain to the child that it wasn't true. Over time, more and more disturbing stories about Pat began to appear. On social media, people complained that she would ask them to watch her children for a couple of hours, but then leave them there for the entire day. Others wrote that she borrowed money and never paid it back. Once, she volunteered to help wrap Christmas gifts for children from low-income families. After that, several nice toys disappeared. Later, they accidentally appeared under her own Christmas tree. There was also an incident at Casey's birthday party. My daughter went there for the celebration, but in the evening she called me in tears. She was ignored the entire time because she hadn't brought Casey the expensive gift that Casey had essentially demanded. When I arrived to pick her up, my daughter was sitting alone inside the house while everyone else was having fun outside. Later, the situation became even worse. When my daughter turned 13, I allowed her to wear my grandmother's antique ring. It wasn't expensive, but it had great sentimental value for our family. A few days later, I noticed that my daughter had become quiet and withdrawn. She didn't want to go to school, but she wouldn't explain why. Later, her friend told the truth. Pat's eldest daughter, Casey, asked to try on the ring and simply never returned it. Then she said she had accidentally lost the jewelry. In reality, she wore it to school and even spread rumors that my daughter had supposedly tried to steal the ring. When I learned the truth, I was furious.
Many years ago, my wife's grandfather found an unusual bag of seeds in the Ozark Mountains of Missouri. The discovery was made near Roaring River Park in the southwestern part of the state. The bag was lying on top of a hill and looked remarkably well preserved. Although it had likely been exposed to the elements for a long time, there were no visible signs of damage or stains. The material proved to be strong and flexible. When at rest, the bag looked slightly wrinkled, but it could still be opened and closed. Out of caution, the find was barely touched, limited to just a few photographs. Inside, there were several hundred seeds of at least 2 different species. Such discoveries are extremely rare. Only one similar artifact is known, a bag of seeds kept at the University of Arkansas. It also contains seeds of ancient plants, ancestors of which still grow in this region today. Interestingly, both bags were found approximately 80 kilometers apart. Later, the owners contacted the university and arranged to transfer the find for research. Over time, more details about the artifact's origin came to light. In fact, the bag had been discovered back in the mid-1960s by 2 men, Jerry Weber and Andy Jewell. Andy had worked for many years as a surveyor for the railroad, farmed, and spent most of his life outdoors. After the discovery, the bag was placed in a glass jar where it remained for about 65 years. Over time, some of the information about the circumstances of the find was lost as Andy Jewell passed away in the early 2000s. Later, relatives were able to recover some details. It turned out the bag was not found simply in the open, but on a rock ledge inside a small grotto on the hillside. In the same area, Andy had found other ancient items, stone tools, and arrowheads. All of these discoveries were kept together for many years. It is likely that the find site was located in Berry County, near Roaring River Park. Andy lived in the Dry Hollow area between the towns of Cassville and Seligman, and the bag may have been found near the Washburn Prairie. Pinpointing the exact location is difficult now, as most people directly involved in the story have passed away. Gathering all the available information and the old artifacts, the family decided to show the find to experts and brought it to the University of Arkansas Museum. The bag was placed in a special storage room in the museum collection, a controlled environment where archaeological artifacts are preserved. The museum curator, Dr. Mary Suter, carefully laid out the bag, seeds, and stone tools for inspection. After the initial examination, she retrieved a scientific book about woven artifacts found in rock shelters of the Ozark Mountains. As she flipped through the pages, she came across an illustration of a bag that matched almost perfectly in weave, color, and construction with the new find. The news quickly spread among museum staff, and other specialists began arriving in the room. Many noted that such artifacts are extremely rare. Archaeologists explained that rock grottos and natural shelters were often used by the region's ancient inhabitants to store items and supplies. These are precisely the kinds of locations where organic materials, which normally decompose quickly, might sometimes survive. According to preliminary assessments, the bag belongs to the pre-contact period, the time before Europeans arrived in North America. Its exact age is still unknown, but it can be confidently stated that it is at least 500 years old and likely much older. To determine a more precise age, radiocarbon dating will be needed. Since the artifact is linked to the cultural heritage of native peoples, the museum must coordinate with the Osage tribe before conducting research. Afterward, samples can be sent to another university for laboratory analysis. For now, the bag, seeds, and other items remain at the University of Arkansas Museum, where they are being preserved under appropriate conditions and studied by archaeologists. Seed bags like this are considered exceptionally rare finds. Before this discovery, archaeologists knew of only 2 similar bags, from Eden Bluff and another heavily damaged one that contained acorns.
Organic materials, such as plant fibers and seeds, usually decompose quickly, so their preservation over hundreds or even thousands of years is highly unusual. Museum specialists immediately began photographing the seeds and stone items to share with other researchers. One of the small black seeds initially puzzled the scientists, but after discussion, they concluded that all of the seeds are very old and no longer viable for germination. Along with the bag, the family also donated several stone tools and arrowheads that Andy Jewell had found. Archaeologist Jared Piard, who specializes in ancient stone implements, quickly determined that these items belong to two different archaeological periods. Some date back to the Middle Archaic period, roughly 2000 to 5000 BCE, and others are from the Woodland Culture period, spanning approximately the first millennium BCE to the first millennium AD. However, these finds can only indirectly help in dating the bag, since it's unclear which of these items were originally found with it. After the preliminary inspection, Dr. Mary Suter decided to show another similar artifact from the museum collection. She led the guests deeper into the storage area, which houses thousands of archaeological artifacts. Among the many shelves with cataloged boxes, she found a collection from excavations conducted in 1932. The box contained various ancient items, shells, bones, fragments of cords, and other objects. Among them was a bag that proved to be almost identical in weave, color, and construction with the new find. It was a little larger, but far more deteriorated. The material was heavily damaged and bound with a piece of leather. Inside, the excavation had uncovered only half of an old carved pipe. Interestingly, this bag was also found in Barry County, Missouri, just a few kilometers from the location where Andy Jewell found his find. Unfortunately, the 1932 artifact has never been radiocarbon dated, so its precise age remains unknown. Next, the researchers showed another famous specimen, the renowned Eden Bluff seed bag. It is approximately 2,000 years old, but is so well preserved that it appears almost new. Examining the museum collection, you could see a vast number of archaeological finds associated with the ancient inhabitants of the Ozarks. The storage houses ceramics, tools, jewelry, and other items that help researchers reconstruct the history of the region. After all the research, the family decided to formally donate the discovered bag to the University of Arkansas Museum. The artifact was formally handed over to the Osage tribe, considered the custodian of many cultural treasures of the region's native peoples. The museum itself is responsible for preserving and scientifically studying such artifacts. The bag was placed in a specialized storage unit with stable temperature and humidity. Under these conditions, the artifact can be preserved for decades and remain accessible for research. The family had long worried whether they could properly preserve such an ancient and valuable item. In the museum, it is now under expert supervision, ensuring not only proper storage conditions, but also continued scientific study. Researchers emphasize that archaeological artifacts are of immense importance for understanding history. That is why, when such items are found, it is recommended to leave them in place and notify specialists who can properly document and study the discovery. The story of this bag ended positively. It is now in a secure location where scientists can study it, and the find will help provide a better understanding of the lives of people who lived in this region centuries ago. In the future, radiocarbon dating of the seeds and a detailed analysis of the bag's material are planned. Once these studies are complete, more will be known about its exact age and origin.
The dog sitter accidentally fed the dogs wood pellets. During our trip, we left our 2 dogs in the care of a dog sitter we found through a specialized pet sitting service. The guy seemed very nice and responsible. Before leaving, we carefully explained all the rules to him. We showed him where the dog food was stored, how exactly to feed the dogs, the proportions for mixing their food,
and where all the necessary supplies were kept. In addition, we left a written instruction sheet with all the details so he wouldn't run into any difficulties. On the morning before our departure, we even fed the dogs together with him so he could see with his own eyes exactly how everything was done. It seemed to us that after such an explanation, it would be almost impossible to make a mistake. Throughout the trip, he stayed in touch with us and occasionally sent messages about how our pets were doing. Because of that, we were confident that everything was going smoothly. But one morning, he texted us saying the dogs were refusing to eat their breakfast. We didn't think much of it, since that sometimes happens when the owners are away from home. When we returned home, the first thing I noticed was the strange appearance of the food in their bowls. Normally, we don't just give them dry kibble. We pour hot water over it, add a bit of goat's milk, and mix in a digestive prebiotic. The result is a mixture that looks like a dark porridge. But this time, something looked completely wrong. It was much darker than usual and had an unusual texture. I asked my husband what that strange mass in the bowls was. Soon it became clear that the problem was much serious. When we went upstairs, we saw that the dogs had vomited on our bed. The sight was very unpleasant, but even worse was realizing that there were strange pieces mixed in with the vomit. That's when we understood what had happened. The dog sitter had accidentally fed the dogs wood pellets meant for a grill, mistaking them for dog food. These pellets were stored in a large bag on the floor in the pantry. The package clearly said grill pellets in large letters. Right next to it was the container with the dog food, which was also clearly labeled. Apparently, on the first night after we left, the dogs ate those pellets. After that, they started feeling unwell, which is why they refused food afterward. Judging by everything, they had gone almost 2 days without eating. We immediately called our veterinarian. Since it was Sunday, the doctor promised to call us back a bit later. In the meantime, we were advised to closely monitor the dog's condition and watch for any new symptoms. At the same time, we contacted a pet poison control hotline. They explained that wood pellets themselves are usually not highly toxic. However, they can cause serious stomach discomfort, digestive problems, or even an intestinal blockage. The situation was complicated by the fact that pellets can be made from different types of wood. Some types of wood can be dangerous for dogs. Among the potentially toxic ones are oak, cherry, plum, prune, horse chestnut, and yew. We checked the composition of our pellets. They contained hickory and maple. In addition, similar blends sometimes include flavorings or even leftover wood from whiskey barrels, which means the composition can be quite varied. That's why we decided not to take any risks and drove to a 24-hour veterinary clinic. Meanwhile, my husband called the dog sitter and told him what had happened. The guy was shocked and began sincerely apologizing. He explained that he hadn't understood exactly where the dog food was and mistakenly used the wrong bag. We also reported the incident to the service through which we had hired him. They opened an official case and said they would conduct an investigation. It also turned out that the platform provides insurance coverage of up to $25,000 for veterinary expenses. At the clinic, the dogs were examined and given x-rays. Fortunately, the veterinarians found no signs of an intestinal blockage. That was a huge relief for us. However, the vets warned us to monitor the dogs carefully over the next few days. It was especially important to watch for any symptoms related to kidney problems, since certain types of wood can cause toxic reactions. Luckily, the next morning things already looked much better. Both dogs ate normally and were able to go to the bathroom. The food stayed down and there were no new episodes of vomiting. It seemed that their bodies had handled the problem. Despite that, the stress we experienced was enormous. What surprised me most was that we specifically showed the dog sitter where the food was and had even fed the dogs together with him before leaving. That's why it's very hard to understand how he could confuse the dog food container with a large bag of wood pellets. After this incident, we decided to move the pellet bag to a different place so that something like this would never happen again. Fortunately, everything turned out well this time, but the story shows just how important it is to be extremely careful when it comes to the health of our pets.
The dog sitter accidentally fed the dogs wood pellets. During our trip, we left our 2 dogs in the care of a dog sitter we found through a specialized pet sitting service. The guy seemed very nice and responsible. Before leaving, we carefully explained all the rules to him. We showed him where the dog food was stored, how exactly to feed the dogs, the proportions for mixing their food, and where all the necessary supplies were kept. In addition, we left a written instruction sheet with all the details so he wouldn't run into any difficulties. On the morning before our departure, we even fed the dogs together with him so he could see with his own eyes exactly how everything was done. It seemed to us that after such an explanation, it would be almost impossible to make a mistake. Throughout the trip, he stayed in touch with us and occasionally sent messages about how our pets were doing. Because of that, we were confident that everything was going smoothly. But one morning, he texted us saying the dogs were refusing to eat their breakfast. We didn't think much of it, since that sometimes happens when the owners are away from home. When we returned home, the first thing I noticed was the strange appearance of the food in their bowls. Normally, we don't just give them dry kibble. We pour hot water over it, add a bit of goat's milk, and mix in a digestive prebiotic. The result is a mixture that looks like a dark porridge.
But this time, something looked completely wrong. It was much darker than usual and had an unusual texture. I asked my husband what that strange mass in the bowls was. Soon it became clear that the problem was much serious. When we went upstairs, we saw that the dogs had vomited on our bed. The sight was very unpleasant, but even worse was realizing that there were strange pieces mixed in with the vomit. That's when we understood what had happened. The dog sitter had accidentally fed the dogs wood pellets meant for a grill, mistaking them for dog food. These pellets were stored in a large bag on the floor in the pantry. The package clearly said grill pellets in large letters. Right next to it was the container with the dog food, which was also clearly labeled. Apparently, on the first night after we left, the dogs ate those pellets. After that, they started feeling unwell, which is why they refused food afterward. Judging by everything, they had gone almost 2 days without eating. We immediately called our veterinarian. Since it was Sunday, the doctor promised to call us back a bit later. In the meantime, we were advised to closely monitor the dog's condition and watch for any new symptoms. At the same time, we contacted a pet poison control hotline. They explained that wood pellets themselves are usually not highly toxic. However, they can cause serious stomach discomfort, digestive problems, or even an intestinal blockage. The situation was complicated by the fact that pellets can be made from different types of wood. Some types of wood can be dangerous for dogs. Among the potentially toxic ones are oak, cherry, plum, prune, horse chestnut, and yew. We checked the composition of our pellets. They contained hickory and maple. In addition, similar blends sometimes include flavorings or even leftover wood from whiskey barrels, which means the composition can be quite varied. That's why we decided not to take any risks and drove to a 24-hour veterinary clinic. Meanwhile, my husband called the dog sitter and told him what had happened. The guy was shocked and began sincerely apologizing. He explained that he hadn't understood exactly where the dog food was and mistakenly used the wrong bag. We also reported the incident to the service through which we had hired him. They opened an official case and said they would conduct an investigation. It also turned out that the platform provides insurance coverage of up to $25,000 for veterinary expenses. At the clinic, the dogs were examined and given x-rays. Fortunately, the veterinarians found no signs of an intestinal blockage. That was a huge relief for us. However, the vets warned us to monitor the dogs carefully over the next few days. It was especially important to watch for any symptoms related to kidney problems, since certain types of wood can cause toxic reactions. Luckily, the next morning things already looked much better. Both dogs ate normally and were able to go to the bathroom. The food stayed down and there were no new episodes of vomiting. It seemed that their bodies had handled the problem. Despite that, the stress we experienced was enormous. What surprised me most was that we specifically showed the dog sitter where the food was and had even fed the dogs together with him before leaving. That's why it's very hard to understand how he could confuse the dog food container with a large bag of wood pellets. After this incident, we decided to move the pellet bag to a different place so that something like this would never happen again. Fortunately, everything turned out well this time, but the story shows just how important it is to be extremely careful when it comes to the health of our pets. My boyfriend tried to put my dog to sleep. I'm 23 years old, and I had been dating my boyfriend, Jay, for 3 years. We lived together in a rented apartment, and overall, everything seemed perfectly normal. We didn't have any serious conflicts, which is why what happened came as a complete shock to me. On Friday morning, Jay left for the other side of the country to help his family. That same day, while I was at work, I unexpectedly received a call from my former college roommate, Bob. We used to live together at university, and now he works at a veterinary clinic about 80 kilometers from my home. He asked if I had a dog named Stixie. I immediately became worried and said yes. Then Bob told me that someone had brought a dog that looked very much like mine to their clinic to have it euthanized. He sent me a photo. The dog in the picture was mine. I recognized Stixie instantly. I grew up with him. When I left for university, he was so attached to me that I didn't even consider leaving him at home. He moved with me. Bob decided not to perform the procedure yet and kept the dog with him while trying to figure out what was going on. After work, I immediately drove to him and picked up Stixie. Then Bob showed me something else that completely confirmed what had happened. He had recorded a piece of security camera footage from the veterinary clinic on his phone. In the video, you could clearly see my boyfriend Jay bringing my dog to the clinic. He was even wearing the same clothes he had left the house in that morning before I went to work. When I saw that, I was literally speechless. I couldn't understand why he would do something like that. That day, Jay sent me several messages, just like he usually did when traveling somewhere. He asked how I was doing and whether everything was okay. I replied almost the same way I normally would. But now, every message from him felt completely different. I stared at the screen, trying to understand what he was thinking and what exactly he was trying to hide. I was half in shock and half completely numb. Instead of immediately getting angry, I started going through all possible reasons for his actions in my head. We had sometimes talked about the future. We discussed that in a few years we might move closer to his family in the north or even abroad, but none of that explained why he would decide to get rid of my dog. I was torn between the urge to call him immediately, start a huge argument, throw all his things out of the house, and the desire to stay silent and think everything through first. In the end, I decided not to tell him anything until I figured out what to do next. The first question was practical: how to protect myself and my dog. The apartment we lived in was rented in my name. The lease listed only me, even though Jay paid half of the rent. Because of that, I started looking into whether I could quickly make him move out. My dog, Stixie, was with me at that moment. He's 11 years old. He's gained a bit of weight and moves slower than he did when he was younger, but overall he's healthy. I called a coworker and told her what had happened. She immediately offered to help and even came over to my place so I wouldn't have to be alone. We talked for a long time and discussed the best way to handle things when Jay returned. After that, I started looking into the legal details. It turned out that since only my name was on the lease and we had no written agreements with Jay, he was not officially a tenant. That meant getting him out of the apartment would be much easier than I had originally thought. We decided that when he came back, I wouldn't be alone with him. There would be people in the house to support me. When Jay finally returned, the conversation started with lies. At first, he pretended to be surprised and said he didn't understand where Stixie had gone. He even offered to help look for him. Then he insisted that he knew nothing about anyone taking the dog to a vet to have it euthanized. When he was shown the security footage, he started making up new explanations. First, he claimed that Stixie had supposedly been hit by a car and that he only wanted to end his suffering. But when a living and completely healthy dog was standing right in front of him, that story fell apart too. Then he started getting tangled in his own words and excuses. At one point, the situation became so absurd that he even said, "Maybe I should have put you to sleep instead." After that, any conversation lost all meaning. Together with my coworker and her partner,
I told him that he was no longer welcome in the house and that he needed to take his things and leave. Fortunately, he didn't start a scene and eventually left on his own. I never received any logical explanation for why he tried to get rid of my dog. The only thing left after this whole story was the realization that the person I trusted for 3 years of my life turned out to be nothing like the person I thought he was. And Stixie stayed with me, alive and healthy. Dog.
I ruined my ex-boyfriend's life over 20 years ago, and I just made sure it stays that way. When I was in college in the 90s, I met Jake through mutual friends. He was 23 at the time. He had already graduated and was planning to move across the country to pursue graduate school. I was also planning a move, with friends, to a city just an hour and a half away from where he was going. We had a lot in common. We fell in love, and it felt like fate. Both of us planning to move 4,000 kilometers and almost to the same place. Jake had 2 sisters and a younger brother. They were all great people, and I got along with them right away. Since Jake was in grad school and I was working, I usually visited him on weekends. He rented a house with 2 roommates from his program. We were young, didn't have much money, but we had fun. We went on cheap dates and spent a lot of time at home. Jake bred and sold small animals. It was part of his studies. He was studying animal science, so being surrounded by animals was normal for him, and honestly, I didn't mind it. I met the wife of his academic advisor, Mary. She was around 50 and worked in the university administration. A wonderful woman. We often had lunch together when I visited. In fact, I connected with people from his program even more easily than he did. But about 2 years into the relationship, something strange happened. One day we were lying in bed at his place, partially undressed, and he suddenly said that he was bothered by the fact that I had gained weight, and that it was becoming harder for him to feel attracted to me. Not a word about health,
just that he found me less attractive. I sat up and calmly replied, "Maybe you should make sure I have proper food when I visit you instead of just crackers and cheese." I had gained maybe 4 kilograms since we met. I wore the same clothing size, and even at 23, I wasn't going to tolerate that kind of nonsense. I didn't argue. It was his problem, not mine. So I just asked, "So what's your solution?" He looked me blankly and said, "I think you should try to lose weight." I replied, "No, I'm not going to do that. So what are you going to do?" He said, "Probably nothing. I just wanted to tell you how I feel." "Great, thanks." I got dressed, went to sleep, and left the next day like usual. We kept dating. But about 3 months later, he called and said he wanted to break up after nearly 3 years together. The reason? And I quote, "You're not scientific enough." I thought, what kind of nonsense is that? He seriously claimed that he couldn't talk to me about his work without using scientific animal terminology. I said, "That's ridiculous. What's the real reason?" But he insisted that was the reason. A month later, he came to return my things, and I made him tell the truth. Eventually, he gave in. It turned out he had been seeing one of his students. Let's call her Mac. She was 19, he was 26, and he was her instructor. I exploded. I yelled at him to get out. My roommate even threatened to throw him off the 2nd floor if he didn't leave, and he left. As soon as the door closed behind him, I broke down, from rage to hysterical laughter. I had seen Mac before, and suddenly it all clicked. At a barbecue at his place once, she had spilled something on her pants. Jake asked if I could lend her a pair of sweatpants. I couldn't. I wore a size 44-46, and she was significantly bigger. And suddenly everything made sense. His comment about my weight was never about me. He just wanted me to break up with him because he was a coward. He liked a completely different type of girl, but didn't have the courage to say it. But you know what really got to me? He said it at night, when I was 150 kilometers from home, after we had been intimate. Did he really think I would just snap, turn around, and drive home in the middle of the night? After that, I messaged his roommates. I thanked them for everything and told them we had broken up. And they already knew. They said they had demanded he tell me the truth. Otherwise, they would have told me themselves. That's why he came up with that nonsense about me not being scientific enough. One of the roommates, George, was a very sweet and attractive guy. He offered to bring my things over and said, "Come over this weekend. We'll have some drinks, relax." The kind of thing Jake never wanted to spend money on. I agreed. I came over. Jake wasn't home. George let me in. And that's when things got interesting. I started taking photos of all his animals because I knew one important thing. He had an animal that was on the endangered species list, and you couldn't legally keep it without a permit. All he had to do was file paperwork and pay $25, but he always said, "I don't want the government in my business." I photographed everything, the conditions, the cages, and another animal that was completely illegal to keep in that state. It was right by the window, visible from the street. Then George and I went into town. We got back around midnight, and we made sure Jake and Max saw us. Me in a short dress, a little drunk, George almost carrying me. We were loud on purpose, laughing, joking, even pretending there was something going on between us so they could hear. I spent the night in George's room. He behaved like a gentleman, but a few times walked out into the hallway just in his boxers. Pure coincidence, of course. In the morning, as I was leaving, Jake said, "You don't have to act like a..." I slowly ate a donut in a wrinkled dress with messy hair. George kissed me on the top of my head. Max sat there not knowing where to look. I smiled and said, "Enjoy my leftovers," and left. At the time, I thought that was my revenge. But no, that was just the beginning. The next day, I developed the film. Yes, the good old days, and immediately called the Department of Natural Resources. I reported everything: the animals, the conditions, the overcrowding, and especially the two that were illegal to keep in that state. I simply asked how to properly file a report, and then I did.
I destroyed my ex-boyfriend's life more than 20 years ago, and I just made sure it stays that way. As it turned out, Jake wasn't liked. Not by his classmates, not even by his own roommates. But me? People liked me. George and another roommate decided to take things further. They filed a complaint with the university about a teaching assistant who was sleeping with his student and giving her preferential treatment. That same night we went bar hopping. They told the story to everyone they knew. The program was small, and the news spread fast. I made another move too. I called Mary, his advisor's wife, and I told her directly. He admitted himself that he's sleeping with a student. I even had his emails where he confirmed it. I sent them to her. Mary was furious. She immediately passed everything to her husband, Jake's advisor. And then it all started. A couple of weeks later, George calls me, emotional. "They're here, inspectors. They're taking the animals." Mac was at home, and trying to save the situation, she said, "All the animals belong to Jake." That automatically cleared the roommates of responsibility. The inspectors knew exactly where to look. They were tipped off about the back window, where the most problematic animal was, the one that was almost never legal to keep. Since George was on the lease, he had the right to let them in. All the animals were kept in shared spaces. The inspectors worked for several hours. Then they came back with a warrant.
They took all the animals and searched Jake's room. The only thing they left were a few guppies in a tank. Now, the most painful part for him. Graduate students live off grants, and he had just received a federal grant around the time we broke up. I called them and simply asked, how do I report that someone with a federal grant is under investigation for illegal animal possession? The result? He lost the grant and had to pay back nearly $30,000. He will never be able to get federal funding again. He wasn't jailed. The animals were in decent condition, but he lost all his animals, paid about $15,000 in fines. 2 animals were transferred to a wildlife center. The university didn't stay out of it either. He lost his stipend, was fired from teaching, essentially had his academic career destroyed, and all because of one thing. He was sleeping with a student. He couldn't even wait 4 weeks until the end of the course when it would have been technically allowed. His arrogance destroyed him. A few months later, I wrote to his sisters, told them I missed them. They replied and told me he had lied to the family, said I broke up with him because of distance. I just forwarded him his own email where he said he had fallen in love with Mac. And that settled everything. I moved on, finished my studies, built a career. And you know what I do now? I help scientists and doctors explain complex things in simple terms. Ironic, right? And him? He married Mac, 2 kids, went back to breeding animals. 20 years passed, and one day I'm giving a lecture at a university, 250 people in the room. And suddenly I hear, "Hey, long time no see." I turn around. It's him, Jake. I pretended I didn't recognize him. "Sorry, do I know you?" He said, "It's me, Jake." I paused and said, I guess my memory just erased you," and walked away. Later, I found out he was there for a job interview for a teaching position. They were seriously considering hiring him. And then I said just one sentence. "It's strange he's still teaching after what happened at University X." That was enough. They checked and found everything. The scandal with the student, the lost grant, the investigation, the old complaints. And you know what? He didn't get the job. Karma. Sometimes it works perfectly. And my conclusion? If the person who's supposed to love you humiliates you because of your appearance, the problem isn't you. The problem is them.